Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I smoked cigarettes for 10 years and the vaping is what got me off of it. Like vaping nicotine.
I got you back on, or
No, that's the only thing
that got you off of cigarettes.
Yeah, was vaping. And then that became impossible. And then this is great because you can like Tucker Carlson it up and no one knows you're addicted to fucking nicotine.
Exactly. Yeah, this is great.
But if someone asked me what my drug of choice was, it wouldn't be weed, it would be nicotine.
Yeah. Have you quit at all?
Yeah, and then I had started taking antidepressants.
Because you quit?
Yeah, I like get chronically depressed without nicotine. It's very strange.
Is it just over like just years?
Well, this is a neurotropic and it's a dopamine uptake thing. So I just think I had a fucking crazy childhood, and when you go through crazy shit, you get like I was always in fight or flight growing up. So it's like that's what causes chronic depression because you're boosting cortisol at an early age. And you're in a deficiency when it comes to dopamine and serotonin. So with nicotine, I felt like I was at zero.
Yeah. Is Zen the go-to now?
No, because if I do this too much, I can't take a shit.
Really?
Yeah, it fucking fucks up any oral nicotine fucks up my digestion.
Oh, that's
so
strange.
This is like for planes or that kind of shit, but usually I'll vape.
Yeah. So I quit for like 2 years.
And then it's got you back on?
Yeah. And, Brent, gave me one. And I was like, he gave me a 6 and then I got sick.
Oh yeah. The 6 is, I don't know how there's like a 30.
No.
Yeah. There's like crazy, like who's doing this?
I have no idea. I mean, a 6 got me sick.
I'll tell you what though.
Like hot sweats.
I'll tell you what, I was at the Comedy Store and I popped a Zyn after taking like 4 or 5 dab hits and the fucking Zyn hit me and I greened out. You
got crossfaded.
Whatever the fuck that means.
Well, you mean when you drink and smoke weed?
Well, I had one cocktail. No, usually like I can drink and smoke weed. I don't have a problem. But when the Zyn hit after like a bunch of dab hits, I was pretty fucked. It was really good hash too. And I stood up and everyone went, oh yeah, and blacked out. Yeah. And then Matt from Master Club caught me as I was falling. It was like fucking like a phone booth toppling over.
Holy shit.
So
you toppling over is another thing.
I know,
what are you,
I'm like
6'6"?
250, 6'6".
You're 6, dude.
Almost 6'7". Yeah.
Yeah, and he caught you. He must have been a big deal.
I could hear everything, but I couldn't see anything. Like it was a very, if I could do it again and not be at the risk, like they gave me a Coke and I was fine. So it was just like my blood sugar had crashed probably from the hash, not eating, and then getting that nicotine hit at the same time. And I remember when the nicotine hit, I'm like, oh shit, something's wrong. I probably should go to the bathroom and handle this like in private, whatever's about to happen. And then I stood up and then all I heard was, whoa, 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 whoa. And then I could hear everybody trying to hold me and it was like, oh. Yeah. So it's like, it was embarrassing. And then in the background, I was with Frank Castillo in the background. I heard, Frank, not again. So I guess it's been a pattern there.
Yeah, you spend a lot of time down here in LA.
Yep, I work here a lot. And I lived here for almost 15 years.
Home base is Central.
Sonoma.
Yeah. And you spend time down here. What do you been up to? Like, what are you doing down here?
A lot. Primarily work with a nursery. So during the pandemic, I started up, just a quick brief thing. During the pandemic, I took a gig with a consulting client because everything got weird. Right. And I was like, I need to have a consistent income. And then that ran its course, moved back to California. And I had consulted for Highline in like 2015 when they were getting started. And they were part of my humble group of friends. I've known them for a while. And so I was running a few quote unquote labs here, but mostly like whenever I've had like grows for myself, it's not been for money. It's been for R&D, hunting new genetics. And so one of the guys at Highline would come by and take a look at like what I was hunting. He's like, do you want to start licensing out genetics? I said, sure. And then I kind of pitched them this whole idea. It's like, look, I've got this seed collection I've been building for 20 years. I've got stuff that doesn't exist anymore. I want a safe place to start popping and hunting this stuff. Maybe we do something larger. So we created a joint venture called Highline Genetics. The nursery down in LA. So there's a nursery in Humboldt, nursery in LA. Next door to it was a distro That went out of business, but they had a micro license. So we took that over and we were going to build that out, like put a 100 lighter there. So we could showcase, use that for the marketing, do small drops with catalyst, all this kinds of stuff. But we got stuck in like license and permit hell in LA. And so that whole thing stalled out. And then the market was extremely volatile after COVID. We're still kind of coming out.
Yeah, it seemed 23 just kind of all went.
Yeah, and so
south.
Everyone felt that. So I came in and started helping them more on the developing the sales team, developing a sales strategy, which was essentially not spending so much time trying to promote the business and sales on Instagram, social media, but to go meet people and spend time with them and develop real relationships. So that strategy worked out. We're doing really well. And now I have like a larger role in the company and I wear a bunch of different hats. So I'm doing that. I still consult. So I'm developing a project in New Jersey, South Dakota, Minnesota. And then also the last year and a half, I just kind of went to every state, met a bunch of people that were doing cool things in these different states. And I was like looking at how unhealthy the market was in California. I'm like, let's see if people are doing things different in other states and let's import that. Like California's been exporting so many things out of the state. Let's see if we can bring some talent from other states into California.
Import the knowledge.
Yeah. And just the whole, everyone's had their own challenges, but they're also doing their own thing. You know, there's different things that, people have created their own lane. So I got to, just basically exploring that. So the consulting, I'm working with BIOS on a light we're about to drop. It's called The Bridge. I just stepped out of Beanstalk. So that's done for right now. I'm going to look at the fertilizer thing a little bit differently. So just, the consulting that, and then there's a few other groups that I like advise, doing some development and just grinding.
New Jersey and Minnesota, two awesome markets.
Amazing.
I mean, Minnesota, I hear, what are PAX at right now? Is limited license?
Well, Minnesota might look like Michigan. Jersey, the pound prices are like 3,000 and higher.
And that's a limited license state.
That is a limited license state.
Okay. And I heard Minnesota's up there too, though.
Minnesota is, but they're doing things a little bit differently. So they have a better process for social equity applicants, and the application fees are like significantly less if you qualify for that. But Minnesota's just been kind of wide open because they like decriminalized it. And then it really started to look like Prop 215, but now they're coming in with a license. So I don't really know how that's going to shape out, but it's an exciting market.
But smaller licenses, or?
I think it's going to be kind of a mix.
Yeah.
I think it's going to look like Michigan.
Yeah. And then what do you do? You're consulting, but you're also helping with cult genetics.
Yeah.
And through the nursery. And are they going to be licensing your genetics?
The nursery is currently licensing my genetics. Mm-hmm. And then I'm not exclusive on that. So my goal is to make sure the nursery is successful. So that means that like throughout all my travels, all the people I'm meeting, if I find something that's exciting, I'm able to like bring other breeders in to the program that I'm doing well with. And so now we have other breeders that were coming in, like we just licensed a genetic from Surefire. So I'll go to the pheno tastings and I'll be like, yo, I think this is going to work for our market. You want to make some money. So and then I get to build that, like our library. It's not just, a lot of times people just kind of like hold on to something that's making them money, but I think that's limited. I think that like, if there is something that's good, I want to bring it in. Rising tide raises all ships. So if I can bring in something that's special and unique, that person can get rewarded for their hard work. Now they're an ally of mine, vice versa. We can do collabs. We can do some development. I don't have to work as hard on that one thing. So I can take my energy and put it into developing other ideas that can be profitable. So it's not like a lot of the times in the cannabis space, it's been very territorial around, especially around genetics. And then ultimately that genetic gets out and there's all this fucking drama and it ends up just, maybe it'll get attention, but it's like negative attention. Whereas the last couple of years, I've just been kind of like, let's just do whatever I can to continue to promote collaboration, like evolution. It's interesting when someone sent me this really rad post, and I think it was showcasing how, I think it was like a type of bacteria that took in an organelle, and then that's what created this. That's what was like the building block of life. I've got it saved. I'm going to pull it up and I'll repost it. But it was this collaboration between two organisms that created a new organism. And you could look at it like, well, maybe they started out competing against each other, but in effect, both of their traits collaboratively came together and created something new. So that happens through competition unintentionally, but it can also happen collaboratively, intentionally, and then you can create an ecosystem that promotes more of that.
Yep.
And so the whole time I've been growing weed, I've just been learning how nature works together. And I think that we should be mirroring more of that behavior. And I've put those things into practice. I wasn't like when you and I first met, I was like guarding every single fucking one of my secrets and this and that. And it was actually through the experience I had with you where, you know, I worked on the Lux manual or whatever, but we kind of stumbled into that whole thing. Yeah. And then that ended up creating all this other opportunity, you know, and I could have been like, if you want this, I want X amount of this and that and that. And that's what everyone does. And they're holding on to everything so tight. But I was like, fuck it, just like, let it go. Let's do something cool. And then to this day, we were just talking about that. People hit me up and they've got a PDF of that manual or they've got a photo of it. And they're like, this is what I've been using and it really works out. Thank you. And then that creates an opportunity for me to have a conversation with them. Well, what are you doing? And then maybe there's a meeting point where we both can make money together. Yeah. And that has been like the greatest approach, which has been different than how a lot of us started out, especially when legalization happened. Before that, it was a little bit more collaborative, but we had to be collaborative. But we were also like the forums, like that's how I found about Ivan. All that was collaborative.
The big thing for us on that is we see a lot of people in the industry not give credit where Correct. The foundation, I mean, it goes through not only your SOP on how to use your lighting, but genetics. I mean, guys that are taking, you know, somebody's work of art that they've, you know, spent, you know, years or, you know, time and energy pheno-hunting, and then they're just taking that and then not giving them credit. I think for Lux, when I reached out to you, and I asked for your permission to put you in the manual. It was a collaborative effort where you would get credit for what you did, and I think, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily. I mean, a lot of people understand where your background is, but they don't understand like you were like the pinnacle of LED. In the very, very beginning when nobody was using them, you were like you were a driving force in that. And the reason why I was a big fan, right? Because I listened to the KISS podcast with Tad. I mean, he really well-spoken guy. I mean, extremely smart, right? And I used to listen to his podcast every single episode. Like I was obsessed with it, right? And you were on there a lot and you had you were the only guy in the industry, in the cannabis industry, that was really talking about and testing LEDs. Like you were on the forefront for sure.
And before that, and that's why I didn't make as much money as other people did during the medical market, because I was obsessed with trying different things. You know, like the same thing we were just kind of like talking about recording engineering. Like at the forefront, like what excites me is something new, like a new sound or a new delivery system for nutrients or all these and I'm probably less focused on that now, but at the beginning that was what got me in the room every day, was trying something out, and which led to a lot lot of ideas and bad systems.
It always does. I mean, it always we've developed a lot of different lights on Lux that we didn't release. You know, and
you remember the Coliseum? Do you remember that?
Nah.
Oh man, I'll show you. But like we built like it was like a PVC tower where you connected these 6-inch, like 3-foot sections, and then you would have like
I remember seeing you posted that on social. And you're like,
so they were 3 levels, but I was like, okay, I had this spot where I had like 24-foot tall ceilings, and I was trying to run another business at the same time. So it's like, how many lights can I put in this room? Yeah. And so you put the HPS bulbs in these light tubes, and you burn the shit out of yourself on those things. But but that was like the first time where it's like, oh, we don't have to just do it the way that everyone's doing it. And it was a terrible idea. It was a terrible system, but it got me thinking about lighting. because of the vertical tubes. And then that was when I started looking at the forums and seeing guys like Ivan hanging bulbs. So we started hanging bulbs, and then deep water culture. There's this whole process of playing around with all of it. And then essentially what ends up happening is you run into a problem with it, which then teaches you, like with deep water culture, we didn't know about oxidizers or dissolved oxygen at the time. We were chilling the water, but you'd still get problems. Yeah. And it's like, okay, this system's got too many problems. Let's cut this back. And then it ended up, thinking about different forms of lighting, because power was a big issue. So like you going back in the medical days, it's like, you might have this building, I was getting 5,000 square foot spaces, but they don't only have 200 amps. And the one thing that I knew is that, like, if you stole power, that's how you get in trouble. Like, everyone I knew that got jail time was because they were tapping power. And it's like, God bless those guys. I wasn't willing to take that risk. So it's like, how can I do more with less? And that was the whole process behind all of it. So that's what led to like playing around with induction lighting. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Yeah, so it was like a more efficient form of fluorescent lighting, essentially.
Oh, yes, induction. Yeah, I remember it. Yeah, the tube.
Yeah, there are tubes and all of that. So
I never tried it though.
And so there's induction lighting, and then there was like the first LEDs, which were the Blurple, and they were like 200 watts, and they were these tiny little UFO things, and maybe you'd get an ounce out of your.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just terrible. So
what did you work with Fluence on develop? Because I know you were pretty close with that team.
So what happened was, I was working for this one group that bought a bunch of land in Desert Hot Springs and Adelanto, and then they got a medical grow in the valley, and it was the same kind of thing. I think there was only like 400 amps there, and he wanted to try and do X amount of lights. And I'm like, well, the only way we're going to do that is if we move to something, like we can't do that with hypersodium. We have to do that with something else. And I was doing a lot of research at the time, and Fluence used to be called BML. So there was, it's escaping me. There was one company that Nick Clace worked at, and I can't remember the name, but there was a precursor to BML. But Nick and they were developing horticultural lighting, but then they had a difference in how they wanted to do things. And Nick peeled off and started BML. BIOS started around the same time too. Nick worked with Neil Yorio, who was a NASA guy that was developing. Yeah, there's this whole like weird little group of science guys that's developed a lot of the horticultural lighting. Mm-hmm. And then they all stole from each other and screwed each other over and turned into different companies. But I had called BML and met Jerry. Did you remember Jerry?
No.
Jerry Kieran, the guy that would eat dessert for dinner and breakfast? No. So he was like an Ivy League dude that had come on to help develop Fluence. So I had called BML, somehow got on the phone with Jerry, and he's like, you're asking questions no one's asking, because I was asking technical questions. He's like, can we meet? We're about to launch a full spectrum new company, because BML was marketed as an aquarium fixture because of the non-compete they had with this company's not around anymore, and it's bothering me. I can't remember it. COVID brain, right?
Yeah.
So I said, sure, I'm down to look into it. So they had every year for a while, Fluence was doing this thing called Photo X, and I went to the first Photo X, which was in San Francisco, and I got invited into this room. No business being there, but it was like all like the guys from Canada, all the big cats from California that had the big licenses, tons of engineers, a bunch of business guys from other companies. And they did this, the coolest thing I'd ever been to. It was like science focused on cannabis horticulture, kind of the first of its kind. And they had like a lot of thought leaders there, and it was super inspiring. And there was maybe only 100 people there. And I just got connected with all these guys that essentially would build the first round of the business in legal cannabis,
which is the Fluence Spider, right? Kind of developed
well, they used it as a marketing. So they brought in all the guys that were going to be early into the market. I'm in this fucking room, and I got to be a part of that conversation and hang out with these guys and talk with these guys and connect with engineers that were doing things. This was like the first guys that were setting up chiller plants and big boilers and taking server room technology and applying to cannabis. All these silly ideas that are cool when we talk about like how to create the most efficient room. Maybe not that practical now that we look at it, back then. And then I was like the first guy to do the multi-level and promote that and all that kind of stuff. So I was able to get the lights early and then meet everyone that was getting the lights, the full spectrum lights early. And then everyone was killing their plants with the lights. And I did my first round with it, like everything was struggling. And so I hit up everybody and using Instagram and tagging and all that and figured out who was tagging Fluence Bioengineering. And I just collaboratively started data mining everybody and then sharing my results to figure out that we had a problem. And then I met this builder / kind of engineer guy named Nicholas Medeiros, who went on to help found another lighting company called Agnetics. But he's like a crazy genius guy. And he hung out with a lot of agricultural scientists from Davis. So we got connected into this whole network of, and that was the first time I heard about VPD. And he's like, and he would always say, he's like, well, no one's following VPD. This is why everything's not working. I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, I'm learning as I go. And so that was data mining all those users, finding out that we all had similar issues. The big issues that we were taking are methodology from bulbs, high pressure sodium, and then going right into it, which was most of us were running our rooms at 50% relative humidity and 75 degrees. And then the canopy temp was between 78 and 80.
Yeah, it's too low. The surface temperature is too low,
but the PPFD was only like 600 PPFD at the canopy, right? So once you bump that up to like 1,000 to 1,200, everything just chokes out. Photosynthesis stops. You have all those issues that we see all the time.
Which is how you came up with your
correct
procedure.
Exactly. So I looked at what everyone was doing, what everyone was having the problems. Next run, I flipped it around, ran the humidity higher, ran the temps. I still, and also kind of factoring in powdery mildew, some of the problems that people are having, like how do we take this, apply this to a methodology, and then reduce conducive conditions for other types of problems.
And it goes into how important procedure is in every aspect of cultivation. Right. I mean, the LAD community, in my opinion, just was built off your procedure.
Which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, I knew it because I was running it and I tested it.
Yeah,
I paid you for consulting.
Yeah, you hired me. I didn't know who you were either.
No, I was a big fan.
I know. I knew that. I knew that.
I was like
we were a fan
I
of
was
the
a
cultivation.
fanboy. I was a fanboy of you.
No clue that was connected to all that you were.
That was connected to Lux.
Yeah, Lux, the whole network of guys that you worked with.
Yeah.
So it was cool.
I don't think I told you.
No, you didn't, which was smart. Yeah. And I think also I think it would have put more pressure on the relationship earlier on because I was just starting the consultancy then. And part of what worked was I was really confident in that process. But if there was somebody there that had, I probably would have been intimidated, and it might have wavered the confidence if I knew everything that was connected to that, so it's better sometimes just to go into a situation, be myself. That it worked. I think I worked with your growers at the time.
Yeah, I think I paid you like $3,500 or something.
$3,500.
$3,500 and paid you for consulting.
And we went through a run.
Yeah, we did. We went through a whole run.
Yep.
I used your SOPs and it worked great.
Yep. And I was stoked.
Yeah. And at the time I was just such an HPS grower and I really needed help. I really like Tad's podcast. And like I said, he's really well spoken. But there's only organic information on there. Like
he's tried to branch off a little bit.
Has he recently?
I think he has. I think that he's mostly looking at regenerative farming because those are the products that he sells.
Well, I mean, it seems like his family was
all of it
huge into.
Yeah, they had a big nursery, and I think that there's regenerative farming is a future for a lot of large scale agriculture. But when we're talking about a plant factory, it's different.
And indoor cultivation, things change. Rock wool, cocoa, intermediates, it's different. And I figured that out by trying to use a lot of what I was learning from Tad's podcast.
Yeah.
Clackamas Coup.
Clackamas Coup, his blend. Yeah.
Dude,
but you were bringing in products that were, you understood the benefits of bacteria and beneficial.
100%.
Yeah, you were implying all. We would talk about that a lot.
Yeah, I would do what I can, but to be honest, I'm just not that talented. To actually create an ecosystem in the media that is
neither am I.
Yeah.
It's
so
really hard.
It's really hard.
Like there are guys like Steve Cantwell, Chris from Floor and Flame, but it's also, it takes up a lot of bandwidth. Yeah.
And you really got to be ahead of it. And for me, I was like, at the end of the day, you got to pay your bills.
Right.
So I really was trying, working with you, listening to KISS podcast, Cultivation podcast, and just couldn't get what I wanted out of it. And that's when I kind of started going more working with big ag. Yeah. And coming up with, nutrient formulations that they were using.
Right.
Which turned into, a whole nother thing.
And I agree with like some of the points that Bugby's made. It's about proper and improper use. So people get, it's kind of faded out a little bit now because the market shifted towards efficiency and yield. You knew that was coming. I knew that was coming. I was growing in living soil beds for a while. And part of the philosophy behind that, it's going to drive a higher quality product, which I think is debatable now. I think that there's a lot of things, again, proper use, right? So you can, like I worked for a big ag company, and I saw them improperly use salt-based fertilizers and just destroy their topsoil. And part of what we were doing was revitalizing the topsoil. So bringing in a lot of carbon, bringing in a lot of biochar, bringing in a lot of those things that people are, those products and practices that people are using so they wouldn't have to just like hit their land with tons of phosphorus.
Yeah.
And that would be the solution is like more phosphorus. And it's like,
it's not it.
No. And trying to explain that to the guys that are producing our corn, all that are just hitting everything up with, like, they just don't know, nor do they care. And that's the crazy thing. Like for them, it's just about getting the yield out, the commodity, like it's a whole other world, but they should care, right? Because what they're doing is they're killing their future and they don't realize it.
100%.
So there's proper use and improper use. And I think Bugby said that the best, because when he was coming out talking about, I think he was on your podcast, right? And there was a whole conversation, the religious conversation between organic and synthetic, and still people, market themselves as organic, I think, as a way to try and create more value for what they're doing. I don't know if you can, people might hate me. I don't know if you can 100% prove that, but I think that if you're like growing outdoors and you're doing things regeneratively, you're creating overall value across the board, and you're going to get a different expression from that plant that might have more value. But I don't think the consumer market has caught up to that. I think we're talking about a connoisseur market. Like I know guys that are getting $800 for an ounce, that are all living soil, veganic, whatever. Every time I see veganic, I laugh. I'm like, okay, that's hilarious to me.
I tried it. 2 years.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just marketing, in my opinion. And then I know guys that are growing in rock wool and growing with salts and getting 800 an ounce, and they don't tell anybody that. And then like for a while, like people would buy my work and label it as living soil, and I would just be like, it's not. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a mix of organic and synthetic, but people would smell it, look at it, smoke it, and be like, oh, this has got to be living soil weed, so we're going to call it that. And I would see that, and I'd be like, oh, nothing is real.
You have your own cannabis brand now.
Yep, Poetry Plants, which has just been like my identity in the cannabis space.
Where is it distributed?
We're doing small drops in California. And then right now we just did a drop in Illinois with Legacy. They're an Athena grower as well. And I've been a part of kind of guiding them through the process, bringing them the genetics, making sure everything's there, essentially being there to consult when needed. And that team there is doing a great job. And the Illinois drop's been really successful. So I appreciate everybody.
How's the brand doing in Illinois? Like, what are the names of your strains and
So we just dropped the Agua Fresca, which is a creation of mine it's Rainbow Belts 20 times Atomic Collider 9, and then Midnight Funk, which is a syrup cream pie, which It's like still going strong. That strain's still going strong. I think Mittens is the one that really put that one on too, with Bones Grown or whatever. You know, I don't know if I can tell everyone's real name on here, but
yeah,
those guys. That strain came to me a couple years ago through a homie, and I was like, this is amazing. I want to breed in with that. So that's what the Midnight Funk is. Sherbet Cream Pie times Atomic Collider 9. Basically, did this whole Atomic Collider 9 line, which is a lot of Sunset Sherbet and Raspberry Kush, Gorilla Glue, and Dogwalker OG and Form Cut. That's essentially what the whole thing is. But why it was, for me, it was exciting was because it was a fast strain. It was really pretty, and it was a good donor into other things to try and maybe make the grow morphology better and speed up the flowering time, because a lot of grows still are like fixed on an 8-week flowering time. So my thought was like, I can take some things that go 9-10 weeks, find some selections that are going to finish in 8 weeks from that still have the characteristics of the receiver.
And how many genetics are you selling in the poetry plants line?
Right now we've dropped one in California, and there's 2 in Illinois. So we
That's
just got started.
I mean, it doesn't need to be a big book of genetics.
There's a lot, but we're rolling it all out.
Yeah,
so I've been
slowly
hunting with Highline since 2022, and then we've dropped a few more than that through Highline, but we've had to take most of our customers. It's changed in the last year. But most of our customers were outdoor and depth growers. So when we're selecting for sun grown, we have to be selecting for that. And so, we hunt, anywhere from like 5,000 to 10,000 beans a year. And then we go through.
Hold on. You hunt how many?
5,000 and 10,000 beans a year, depending on how much bandwidth we have. So.
At Highline.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah. And I would do more.
That is
if I could.
astronomical.
It's not if you think about what we did with hemp. Like with hemp, we were hunting millions of seeds, to make selections. But I usually I like to pop at least 50 of a variety, but 200 is nice. And then what we'll do is we'll pick 4 to 5 from that, and then we'll just re-veg those selections. And then we'll run those in a full term and, early depth, late depth tests, and then a few indoors. And when I still had my labs up in Sonoma, I was testing the indoors there, but I had to shut all that down. And then, part what we've learned is we have to make sure that what we're putting out to the market is pretty bulletproof, that like anybody can run it. And so that's not necessarily selecting like what I like the best. It's more about what's going to perform the best in the most stressful conditions. And then what I like the best is what I'm starting to drop into the brand.
How are you Illinois market compared to California market for your new rollout?
It's been a lot better
in Illinois.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of markets that are limited, and then they're kind of underserved. And what's happened with a lot of those limited markets is like the big MSO groups kind of came in, struggled, and then are dumping some of their grows, and then younger guys are coming in and figuring out how to take over those grows and then bring a life into it. So the guy that's kind of leading the charge in Illinois is a guy named Ryan Hendrick. He and I went through a very similar experience in Pennsylvania during the pandemic, and that's how we became friends. I'm like, hey, you got screwed that way too? I'm like, so did I. Like, let's go grab a beer,
Yeah.
And he understands what consumers value. And I identified that early on with him. And he was the first guy to say, hey, would you want to do like a licensing thing with the genetics? I'm like, yeah. So he was the first guy to kick this off. And then I'm like, let's, this is fun. This is cool, because my favorite part of the process now is hunting and selecting genetics.
Yeah. And you got the foundation with Highline.
Correct.
And and then you can just do all the work there, help them.
Yeah. So it's a whole web of collaboration. And then that's leading into setting up nursery collaborations in other states with Highline. We're able to bring our genetics to other nurseries. So if you're a nursery in another state and you're interested in bringing in new genetics, and part of what we want to do is just continually bring new content to these farms and prove it. Like we're going to go through the 1.5 or 2 years of testing, which is how long we've been testing these genetics.
When you're doing 5,000 pops a year.
Yeah. We're gonna do more too.
I mean,
like I'm moving because we're making our own seeds now.
Lots happening fast.
Yeah,
and you're giving a lot of new access to a lot of new cultivars and markets that don't have them.
correct. And then also selecting things for those markets because every market is like a different palate and a different consumer. And I think that's going to continue to develop because we've had so much of like the gelatos get outsourced out, and it's interesting because I was just watching like I was watching this YouTuber that's funny. He's like like I don't even know what you'd call him, but you ever watch Goblin?
Nuh-uh.
Okay. And he was reviewing spray pack,
Okay.
flower, and one of the things is like he didn't want to. He was just doing it for the people. He's like, if I die from this, I'm dying for this. But one of the things is every flower looked the same, and it just was treated with a different flavor. And when I look at it, it all looked like lemon cherry gelato to me. That was just spray packed. So what's happened is that like we've had like this Runts lemon cherry gelato wave, and what's been keeping us alive is people adding artificial flavoring to it, instead of developing like an actual new genetic with a different flavor profile and different effect. So it's interesting that I think that's going to die out. And I think some of these markets are going to start popping back up with wanting different flavors and different profiles. And hopefully we can get the consumers off of just focusing on THC as being the value metric.
100%.
Because that's limited so much. And most of it isn't even real. I will tell you this, in Illinois, the testing is real. So like when I tested genetics and made selections here in California, they tested significantly higher, even in just the reference tests compared to what we tested out there. So that created a unique opportunity because one of the strains that we dropped here tested like 30% or something like that. And then out there it was testing at 13%.
Yeah, I see that in different markets all over the place. And Puerto Rico is one of the markets where I see just really high numbers coming out of Puerto Rico.
Like it doesn't physically make sense.
No, exactly. I get tests all the time. I'm like, come on, bro. Like, let's get real here. I know you're using Athena and it says 34%, but let's be real here. I mean,
right. And I don't think we really understand what's creating the effect because I know like something like Oreos or Purple Punch, will test high legitimately, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't really create an effect that's desirable. So what's not creating that desirable effect? And you would think if THC was the value metric for all value metrics, it would be valuable, but it's not, So I hope we can expand the palette a bit. And also just there's a whole large base of possible consumers that won't go buy weed anymore because they had bad effects from it being maybe too strong in a certain way. And I think people look at like low THC numbers as being like, oh, it was poorly grown, right? Meanwhile, if they buy a black market pack, there's no testing results on that.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that's going in those packs is probably testing around, below sub 20%.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. And so I think it's just a lie. And there's a few lies that happened early on with cannabis legalization. Basically, big companies came in and they had to figure out how to sell it. So it's like, okay, we got to create buckets that people can understand. There's like over 100 cannabinoids, but we're just going to pick the 2. We got THC, we got CBD, and then it's either indica, sativa, or hybrid. And none of those are value indicators. And everyone's cannabinoid system is subjective. And now we've just driven towards having one really extreme effect from smoking that I don't even really enjoy anymore. Like I showed you what I'm smoking on right now, which is like this Burmese Trix Cross from Always Be Flowering. And I haven't gotten it tested, but I could tell you it's probably below 20%. But I have a good experience from it. I want to pick up my guitar and play music. I don't feel like I took a Percocet, like 3 Percocets. And, I can be a dad and I can participate in life and have it just be, a filtered experience in a happy way, which is what cannabis has always been for me.
I think it's just time. It's just time for it to flush out and for people to get educated.
I'm pushing that. So like in Illinois, we had this drop and they were like, it tested too low. We can't sell it. I'm like, no, we got to figure out how to sell it. Well, what do? We have to lower the price. Like waive my royalty. What's the cheapest we can sell this? Because I just want people to try it. Hopefully, if the price is low enough, they'll try it, And that's seemingly working, where people are now trying it and be like, this is great.
How was the sell-through? Good?
Awesome.
Yeah? Great. What did you guys end up selling those units for?
I think that like eighth out the door for the lower THC was 24.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
No. So like the standard price is around 40.
Yeah. Wow. What is that? 24 times 128.
It's like a $12 wholesale.
$3,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's Illinois.
It's Illinois.
Yeah. And you can't do that in California.
No. And in California, I'm trying to figure out how to do a $15 eighth out the door. That's where I'm at. That's the next play.
Yeah.
Like, because when, doing the drop in California, I looked at like what people care about the most here is price. So how do we create the highest quality with cool genetics, maybe play around with cannabinoids. So it's not all got to be like 28 to 32%. Let's see if we can use price as a way to expand people's palates and reassess what the value of cannabis is.
When you're consulting and working with these partners, do you have a good idea of what your cost to produce is for flower?
Yeah. I mean, it's different in every building.
Yeah.
But we figure that out. Looking at that.
What is it? What?
Again, it's different in every building. So it can be
on average
somewhere between 400 and 800 a pound.
That's not 400. It's great. Indoor?
In some markets. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
But with those lower price points mean more automation, you're not going to be hand trimming at that price.
Yeah. You know, I talked to a lot of guys on facilities, and it was funny because my break-even point on my facility is $250,000.
Yeah.
I got to make $250,000
a month.
A month.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
You got to break even. You got to make $250,000.
Yep.
And I talked to C-Town Gabriel just the other day on the phone.
Yep.
And I know what my number is. Yep. It's $250,000. And I asked him what his number was. What's your break even? He's $250,000. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And that's how
big is the canopy?
400 light facility.
400 lights. Yeah.
Mine's a lot bigger.
What's your greenhouse?
I'm greenhouse.
Yeah. So you have economies of scale built in.
Yeah. But I found that really interesting. But he's selling his packs for double than I am.
Right.
So
you have to do more volume. And that's the other thing too, is that your cost per pound goes down based on your yield.
Yeah.
So now you see the trend is like people are aiming for 90 to 120 grams a square foot. Yeah. And we have the technology now to push that. And I think it's arguable whether or not you get the same quality out of it. I mean, another thing I agree with Bruce Bugby on is that it's a zero-sum game, that you're going to push more yield, but you're going to drive a larger surface area, which dilutes the cannabinoids value.
Dilutes the quality.
Yeah, and dilutes the quality.
What do you yield dilution?
Yeah, yield dilution.
Yeah.
Right. Now there's some variety, something like Georgia Pie, right? Or Baby Yoda. Those are two things where I've gotten great quality out of them and hit high numbers, but that's the genetic potential. But something like Baby Yoda's got to go like 10, 11 weeks. So it's all this math that goes into it.
Yeah, yield dilution seemed to be a pretty normal term in big ag.
Right.
With regular tomatoes and everything, you get yield dilution. It's normal. Mm-hmm. And I think the cannabis industry, back when, the 6 pound, 10 pound a light, runs, you got in trouble for that, right? I mean, I think
I got in a lot of, because I was like, what?
Come on,
man, we got to troll this nonsense.
I mean, there's that balance.
You're right.
If you're pulling,
I think they were going to sue me too because they thought I was an employee of Logs because of the manual.
Yeah,
I got to. I was just like, you guys are ridiculous.
Yeah,
we won't even say their name.
No. But that all got squashed. But
yeah,
it's. I mean, if you're growing over 6 pounds a light, I mean, it's definitely you're going to definitely have yield dilution.
Do you know anyone that's had actually 6 pounds? And the whole thing too is the whole by the light thing, right?
Well, one of my good friends named Tony, American Ave Hydroponics up in Hayward, real tight. He's my boy. And he would put 2,000 watt single-ended Hortilux HPSs over a 4x4. And he would be getting like 5, 5.5. And he said occasionally he would hit 6. But you got 2,000 watts over a 4x4. I mean, it's a lot of PPFD.
It is. And then if you look into like everyone doing the Undercanopy thing now too,
you're seeing,
you're going to see some increase in yield.
But I don't, with the Undercanopy, this is just my opinion, and I don't know a lot about it. Yeah. We're running it right now.
Yeah.
Just started. But the difference, you're the lighting expert.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to, you tell me if I'm right or wrong. But it seems like when you're doing Undercanopy, you're spreading the light across a larger surface area.
Yep.
So you're maintaining the quality, but increasing the yield. Am I?
No, that's yeah, I agree with that. I think it depends. So I think why the Undercanopy lights have been so successful is because what's been dominating the market are lower yielding varieties that only sell if they have a specific color, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we all know is that, like, if I put a top light over like an LCG or a runts, like the top third of that canopy is going to purple out. But then we start hitting the point where the lowers are not as developed and they get green, right? Which then people have to sort out of the pack, and they're not going to get the same value for that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can observe that, like, by being closer to the light, you're going to get more color, more of that expression that's desirable for the consumers. So if we put those lights inside the canopy, we're going to fill out those flowers. They're going to finish close to as quickly as the top, and they're also going to get the color. So with the Undercanopy lighting, I think why it's working right now is because this is the genetic that's taken over the market. And so once that shifts, we'll see if they are as relevant. It's really interesting to see that not only has that runts gelato phenomenon captured most of the sales, it's now changing how we grow. It's now changing what we're growing with in those methodologies.
Yeah.
I tried, so with Fluence, because I helped them out so early on, I was never an employee of them either. But I got to be a part of some of the R&D processes, and part of that was testing out inner and Undercanopy.
Yeah, because it's not new. They use Intercanopy for large ag.
Yeah, it's not new. It's just being adopted now, I think, mostly because everyone's growing lemon cherry gelato or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's not a great yielding variety. But so if you can get 20 or 30% more, because if we're looking at the math of it, let's say, I'd say the average yield from lemon cherry gelato over a 4x4 is probably like 1.2 to 1.5. That's what I see, right? Or like a traditional like black runts or regular runts. There's some outlier crosses. I know Sea Junkies develop some things that have that nose and flavor that yield more. But if you're able to put, a couple 100 watts inside the canopy and get 30% increase in yield, that's a big deal, because the big thing is, like, let's say I'll use Georgia pie as another example. If I grow that, I'm going to get 90 grams a square foot with that, without having to work for it, without having to do anything additional. But when it comes to selling that, I might sit on that for 6 months, and then I might have to sell it for $300 less. So what these big farms, the most important thing for them is sell through and yield. So if they have 100 pounds of Georgia pie and it only took them 30 lights to get that, and then they have 100 pounds of lemon cherry gelato, but it took them 60 pounds to get that, they're going to
60 lights.
Yeah. Whatever. They're going to pick that lemon cherry gelato because they're going to be able to sell that, get the money, because everyone's kind of living hand to mouth still.
Yeah.
And like, if you have a killer yield with Georgia pie at your facility, that doesn't matter if you can't sell it. You got to make that 250 no matter what.
Yeah.
So you're going to switch over to lemon cherry gelato. It's because of what the buyers are. That's what they'll come in and buy. They'll smell it. They're okay. I'll take all of it. Right.
Yeah.
Georgia pie, they're going to be like,
yeah,
there's no color.
With the Undercanopy, what's pretty interesting is if you took the Lux 200 watt bar, and put it upside down under the canopy,
it's the same thing.
You had the Undercanopy light.
Well, that's what I did with the original spiders, right? They had the removable bars, and so first thing I did with Fluence is ask them for extension cables for those bars, and then I would remote the driver, mount it up on the top of a rack, and then I would put those bars everywhere. And they thought I was crazy. And then they were like, okay, let's try and make a light that we can do this. Cause I was just like, make everything as remote as possible so I can keep playing with this. First guy I saw doing that kind of stuff was Alex, was Mango.
Spreading it out.
Putting panels in between.
On sidewalls. Yeah.
That
the
was
drop down in the center.
Guy. Yeah, Alex, early on.
Side lighting.
early on, like, and a little backstory too. Like I used to work his products in Florida when I was like 19, 20. I didn't know at that time, but like the Miami mango was like, the mango was the thing down in Florida. It was mango and blueberry. And so, and it was like all a surfer network of guys that worked all that. And Alex was like a part of that group. So
Yeah.
that was how I originally was like Miami mango. And then I, however long ago I hit him up when he was doing the social media thing, he was posting so much tech, so much of the little tricks that he was doing, because I think Alex is first and foremost like one of the best grow room builders. And so he would always be troubleshooting and figuring things out because he had cultivation knowledge. He would be applying like all those little things. And that's become, a lot of what he developed early on become standards, which is cool to see. But that I hit him up. I'm like, was it this group that you were working with? I'm like, oh shit, bro. I built my first recording studio off of
he was a legend.
Miami Mango.
Yeah, I remember meeting you and him together at MJ Biz.
Yeah.
And you filling me in.
Yeah. So long story there, but pretty cool. And he was always doing stuff like that, and then I would try and figure out my own way of doing it.
Yeah.
And
I've listened to a lot of podcasts that you've been in.
Yeah.
Right? Kiss, First Smoke of the Day, and a lot of different pods that you've done, but I've never heard your story.
Yeah. And I haven't really shared it a little bit. So I'm from Florida. I was heavy into music as a kid, music and basketball. Once I joined a band at like 16, basketball didn't matter anymore. And everyone in my band smoked weed. I was like into straight edge hardcore. So I was very judgmental in high school. I come from a family that struggled a lot with substance abuse. So my thought was that if I just don't do anything, I won't catch that demon in my family, right? So it was super judgmental. So all the guys that I grew up with that I'm still friends now, when they see me like in the weed industry, they just fucking die laughing, because I would be like, preaching to them every time they would like spark up a bowl at band practice. And I'd be like, oh.
So you were raised in like a really religious family, Christian.
Yeah, I grew up like 80s born again Christian, where like the pastor of the church had like a Rolls Royce.
Oh, that kind of Christian.
Well, it was like in Florida, being an 80s kid, both like my dad, I found out way later that my dad used to grow weed, and he never told me about that. But my mom and my dad, when my mom was pregnant with me, she used to be like a hardcore hippie. Like they hid their whole story from me until like my mom passed a few years ago, and then all of her friends started telling me like how my mom really was. And I'm like, my whole fucking life I didn't even know. My mom was like dealing coke. I'm like, what? I'm like, what is going on? But I think what happened is, if we look at the whole arc of it, is that a lot of the hippie boomer generation, right? And when the 80s hit and Reagan became president, they all got serious, and the solution to create community was to get really heavy into this like mutated version of hippie Christianity, right? So it was very like experiential, which is what drove a lot of like the evangelism, all of that. So I studied like, how did it get here? But there was like a whole hippie movement that went heavy into Christianity, and then it became very materialistic during the 80s. Because the 80s was a lot of boom, a lot of success in South Florida. Because my parents moved to Florida in the 70s, and it hadn't really been developed. But we've all seen Cocaine Cowboys, right?
Yeah.
Like when that boom happened in South Florida, that was in the 80s, and that's when all the banks came in, and that's when a lot of the mob came down from Jersey and started to develop in Florida even more, right? And all those banks, like all of South Florida arguably was built up because of cocaine money, right? And so there was the reaction to that too was like a lot of hyper Christianity, big churches, all of that. So I grew up in that, and my mom's side of the family was like very traditional from New Orleans, so Southern. Like my great grandfather was the superintendent of the New Orleans PD, and he was the one that ran the mob out. There's old news articles. He was the first police chief to hire African-American police officers, and he got kicked out after he got asked to resign after that, which is a cool little subtext. So he's actually in like a lot of the history of like African-American and police and all that, some of those books. And no one told me all this. I had to go find all this later. But like war veterans.
Even after they knew you got into cannabis.
Yeah, my family kind of blacklisted me after, like I had to keep all that.
You got blacklisted.
Oh yeah, they had me arrested. Yeah, they had me arrested and thrown in a mental institution. So yeah, it was
after you left Florida?
Yeah. Long story. We'll talk a little bit about that maybe because we want to hear the story. It's pretty crazy.
How did you actually start growing cannabis?
So I was selling it. So I basically started smoking weed because this is so stupid. But you remember Y2K?
Yeah. Yep.
And everyone was like, the world's going to end.
Yeah, 100%.
And I was like 18, 19. And everyone's like, the world's going to end. I'm like, well, shit, everyone around me has been smoking weed and having a good time. I'm going to fucking at least smoke weed before the world ends. Like, let's try that. And so I was at band practice and I had to hide it from some of my band members because I was so fucking judgmental towards them. So it's like, if they saw me smoking weed, I was going to eat shit forever. So there's one guitar player that was cool. And I'm like, yo, let me try that. So I smoked weed, had an incredible experience. I was like, oh, this isn't that bad. I don't think I'm going to get addicted to this, right? I thought it was going to lead to like serious substance
Gateway
abuse.
Drug,
well, you know, I just saw that in my family. Like I have family members that I don't even know where they are anymore. Like they're homeless. They got addicted to fentanyl. They're on the street somewhere. You know, we tried to help them out and they just kept getting in trouble and real dark shit. But so I just kind of looked at all of that, you know, and there was a lot of alcoholism in my family and a lot of weird abuse that came from that. So like, I just didn't want anything to do with it. I never felt like I did well in school and I was kind of fast tracked to work through some of the you know, I could have had a seat at a different table because I did well in school and because my grandfather was important in New Orleans, but I refused it. I just wasn't into it. Picked weed and rock and roll. And so I started smoking it then. And then, you know, I was pretty, you know, I didn't have a lot of support. There wasn't money on my mom's side. Because of what happened with my mom and my dad, there was no support. You know, if things were dire and we were about to be homeless, there would be a check in the mail. So we did have that. So if we want to talk about privilege, it was that. But it wasn't like, because I didn't accept like the scholarship thing or whatever. And it's like, I didn't want to do that. They're like, okay, then we're not giving you anything kind of thing.
Because you didn't want to go to college.
Well, I did, but I didn't want to go through the program that, you know, like I tested high on this like Duke thing. So I had like a fast track to Duke. And then I went and I took a look at that and it just made me depressed and felt like I just didn't feel connected to any of it. And this was also around the time where I was coming out of the Christian church, coming out of that whole thing. I was seeing that there was a lot of lies. I was kind of like waking up to a lot of it, seeing a lot of things. You know, my mom had a best friend whose son was a couple years older than me. And God, I got some crazy fucking stories. I don't know if we have time to talk all about this, but he ended up becoming like the head of like this oil empire and then went and bought all this land in Gaza. And he was like half Jewish and he got brought into this crazy network. He passed away. No one really knows what happens to him, but he started his name was Guma Agyar. Really interesting Wikipedia deep dive. But I was around all these people that were like really intense, doing crazy things. And there was a religion kind of woven into all of it. And I just saw a bunch of unhappy people that were tortured. And so I'm like going, this doesn't add up. You know, I would go spend time with my family. And my dad came from a family. My dad was the opposite of it. My dad's side of the family was more connected to organized crime in Jersey. There was like, you know, very elite Garden District, New Orleans, political. And I'd go there and everyone wasn't happy and it was abusive. It was like Succession in a way, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm good. You know, I would go spend time with my family. And my dad came from a family. My dad was the opposite of it. My dad was Like, I don't look at it as a gift. And I have a different perspective too. Like just because someone has grown up with, people call privilege or money, that doesn't mean it's a good thing. That doesn't mean there isn't a cost to that.
And I think it's kind of
it's a curse.
It is.
Yeah.
It kind of could hold you back.
But not only that, you become enslaved by that institutional money. And that's the thing that I've seen happen with my family, is that because of my grandfather having wealth, everyone in the family was always subservient to that. And that's just not in my nature.
Yeah.
I was like, nah, fuck that. And I'm also in Florida, which multicultural, and I grew up in Boca, which had like some of the most money in the world. And then, kids from Haiti, Jamaica, like my best friend growing up was from Cuba, Puerto Rico, a lot of Brazilians. And, so I felt more like I could be myself around people that didn't have those airs, and that's what I was into. And so, I started a recording studio. I basically was working 3 jobs, started a recording studio, and started recording bands. And I got a scholarship from the local state college. Ended up paying me like $5 or $6 grand a semester to stay in college there because I did well on my SATs and everything else. So I was like, I'm going to take that. They're going to give me money to go to school. I did that for 2 years, but I took all that money and I put it towards building a recording studio, started recording bands. And then next to the recording studio in Delray Beach was like a wood shop guy who was like a crackhead. His name was Jimbo. And he had a finishing shop. And every week this surfer guy would come by and drop off weed. And I'm like, it was the best weed in Florida. And so I became friends with him and I started buying weed from him. And one day he was like, you'd be good at doing this. I'm like, what? Like doing this? I'm like, for real? I'm like, yeah, selling.
Oh.
Yeah. So I started selling out of the recording studio. People would come there, and then we threw a lot of parties. And then because I was selling, one of my recording, this is a cool fucking story. Not a lot of people know this. So Florida was also like a big rehab place. Did you know that? Like the rehab industry in Florida.
I've heard a little bit about it, but not much.
Yeah. So you get a lot of people that are junkies that are coming down there to get clean. A lot of wealthy junkies, second generation money that went off course, right? And got addicted to drugs coming down there. So that was a huge part of the music scene too. Cause you would have people that were in huge bands that would be sober there. And then they would be like kind of starting their life back over or whatever. So I was like close to a lot of the guys that were in Marilyn Manson. I was in a band with Brad Stewart, RIP. He was a great guy, but he passed away from a heroin overdose. But he was down there for rehab. And I met him and started recording his band. He was the original bass player for Manson. And like when I got kicked out of my, I was always kind of living between warehouses and friends' houses at the time, because once I started not following the path my family had, they're like, you're out, good luck. My dad didn't really want anything to do with me. My dad thought I was a maniac. I was always getting in trouble. We were always breaking into warehouses and throwing parties and doing all kinds of things. But it wasn't, my dad always used to say, you're like a drug addict without the drugs. That's what he used to say to me. I'd be like, well, it's your fault. No. But so I started recording all these really rad bands, and my whole goal was to get a record deal. And one of the artists that I was recording was a guy from New York that was coming off heroin and moved down to Florida. He was like the son of like this guy that ran like a lot of this major ad agency in New York. And so he started running out my studio all the time, and he would come in and buy like a quarter pound for me, like a top dollar. And he would just sit there and smoke through the whole thing in a week. He was like the best customer I ever had. And he was just stoked that I had good weed. And then we would record and I would play on his album, help him out. Well, his drummer started coming down that he used to play in a band with. And his drummer was one of the largest indoor growers in New York. And he got arrested after I moved to California. So I tracked this guy. But that show, the show Weeds, was based off of one of his dealers. And she ratted on him. So like that whole show, I'm not going to say his name. But if people want to know, I just don't want to put it out there. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't know what happened to the guy. But that show was based off of what was really going on with that woman like a year or two later.
Wow.
So they were writing that while it was happening. And, you know, nobody really knew that at the time. And he would come down and record with this other cat, and he would see me selling weed out of the house. And so he was, you know, he was comfortable with me. I didn't know anything about him being a grower or anything like that. All I knew is he had a recording studio. He told me he had a recording studio and a rap label, right? That he had to shut down because he got held up at gunpoint by one of his artists. And he had like $500,000 worth of vintage recording equipment in this apartment in Greenwich Village. So I'm like, what are you doing with all of that? Nothing. Let me bring it down here. I'll set it all up and I'll record you guys for free. And then I'm going to get all this like legit next level gear for recording. It took me about 3 months to convince him of that. And then he said, fine. So I went up to New York. I cataloged everything, brought it back down. But while I was up there, he had me start doing like personal assistant things for him, like running around, picking up stuff, this and that. And he basically, what he would have me do, and then this was ongoing, is he would give me like a purse full of cash, and he would like fly me out to Oklahoma or Chicago, and I would go there and I would buy like a vintage muscle car or a classic car. And he had this crazy auto body shop in the Bronx where he was trying to do a show, and he was taking vintage cars and updating them and remodeling and putting them back on the market and making money. So this is the way that he was
laundering money.
Yes. And so I didn't know that at the time. So I'm sure, whatever you need. He'd give me some instructions, and then I would put this car in a trailer and drive it back. Sometimes one of the times the trailer broke down, I had to drive the 67 Cobra Mustang down in Palm Beach from Oklahoma the whole way. And that thing peaked out at like 64 miles an hour. So I drove this, it was basically Eleanor from Gone in 60 Seconds. Drove that thing from Oklahoma to Florida. And it died right when we got to Palm Beach, like 20 minutes from the house where we were dropping it off. So I did that for him, but he would pay me like, $4 or $5 grand to go do this. And then I earned his trust. And he lived in a penthouse on Wall Street. And he had like a stripper baby mama there that was like from the hood. It was a trip, but I knew we had a rap label. I'm kind of stupid. I don't know what's going on. And then there was like a room in the apartment that was, he would do business in. I didn't know what was going on. And then he was an on and off again heroin addict. And he would relapse and then go to this clinic where they would do some sort of like really quick clean out. And it would cost like 10 grand, but it was like something back in the day. It was like some Asian dude that would clean him out. And when that happened once, he basically said, hey, I'm going to be going through this. I'm not going to be able to work. I need you to do the work for me. And that's when we went to his first grow. And he took me to this it was like a row of warehouses in Brooklyn. And it was like a beautiful wood shop, tools everywhere. And there was like a big false wall with a mechanical arm, like the movies, press a button, the whole thing comes out. Then there's a giant bank vault door. And he opens up this bank vault door, and we walk up, and above all the warehouses was like a 200 light grow. It was all living soil too, which was a trip. And he's like, I need you to cut down all these plants, and we're going to throw them all away. I'm like, why? He's like, they're ruined. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, look at this. And he showed me like they're all webbed up from spider mites. So like one of his workers, everyone there was a junkie. Like they were all like making a ton of money and doing a bunch of heroin. Like heroin was a thing. So like he had a whole group of people that would work for him that would then like go through bouts of like heavy drug abuse and then not show up to work. So that was like my first experience in the grow room and how I got kind of cued into that. And then, I had one of his cousins living with me down in Florida, and we got into it, and the whole thing got ruined because this cousin kept throwing parties at the house, and I had all this equipment there that I was responsible for. So I told him no more parties at the house, but I had the house all built out so it was soundproofed where the recording area was. And so he would bring like these homeless people over and party, right? And I got like $500,000 worth of recording equipment in there. So I flipped out because he did it again after I told him. And then I guess one of the homeless people were in the backyard and I didn't see him. So we got into it. I started choking him out because I was basically going to choke him out and drag him out and kick him to the curb at that point. And this guy, I didn't know this guy was in the backyard. I cleared out everybody else. And he came by and hit me over the head with like a 40-ounce closed malt liquor bottle, fractured my skull, had a fucking seizure, hit the ground. Right. Then they robbed me and they got in their car and took off. I actually went outside dizzy with like that front end of a microphone stand. I was going to beat the shit out of this fucking guy. And I know who he was. He was like some like ratty looking white dude. And he pulls out like a 24-inch fucking machete. And I'm like, I'm good. And then I sit down and I'm like, I think I got to go to the hospital. You know, drove myself to the hospital. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Blood had gotten in my brain. I thought I was going to die. And I was like, man, fuck this fighting shit.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, we're all like, you know, we're pretty fragile. And that's why I just never, I had a couple other instances too where I've seen people like, you know, get in fights and die in front of me and stuff. And I'm just like, that's made me pretty much a pacifist on most things. Cause it's like, and it was a blessing too, cause I probably would have killed him, you know, how pissed off I was. But that was the end of that situation with the guy in New York. I basically
you got out of that crew.
I got out of that crew because it created a lot of drama. And then it was his nephew that was with me, and I was kind of mentoring him, and it went south. I wasn't ready to be mentoring somebody. So then I called him up. I'm saying, I'm done with all this. And then a month later, I got a record deal with Geffen because I was sending music to guys out in California, and they're like, hey, we'll get you a deal. We'll get you a demo deal if you can get out here. So that was the sign. It's like, all right, time to get the fuck out of Florida. And so I moved to LA in 2005. Very quickly got a deal with A&M, which became Geffen. But they weren't paying me very much. And I moved into a big warehouse, and I was at a video production company. So I had the recording studio, and I would do video. And this is right when Final Cut came out, and I was very early onto that. And I had gotten a gig, and I would sell weed to all the MMA guys. But I got in with this company called American Top Team, which was one of the biggest MMA companies now in the world.
I've heard about it.
Yeah, and Dan Lambert and Primo and all these guys. So I got connected through those guys through a friend and another weed relationship down in Florida. And they had me write a metal theme song for their show. And they're like, can you operate a camera? I said, sure. Can you never operate a camera? Can you do video editing? I said, sure. Never video editing. Can you do post-production effects and all that? I said, sure. Never did any of that. And then I would like buy these DVD training videos and stay up all night drinking coffee, smoking weed, and going through every fucking tutorial. And then I would build something for them. And, you know, these guys were fighters. They were like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I'm like, really? I'm like, cool. And so I got into filming and shooting all of their productions and built a whole video studio off of selling weed, and then turned that into a legitimate business. You know, and I was making incredible money at like 22, 23 years old, and touring around doing all these shows that were right below the UFC. I produced 2 of the World Submission Wrestling tournaments, Abu Dhabi. I filmed the one out here in Long Beach. First time really out in California was when I came out here to do that. And it's, you know, like Eddie Bravo, Joe Rogan was there. First guy I smoked weed with in California was Joe Rogan. No lie.
No way.
No fucking lie. Yeah, outside of the Comedy Store. So I got tied into this whole MMA group out here. One of the guys' name is Scott Nelson, who's got a really wicked stem cell treatment lab or clinic in Mexico right now called CHIPS, just FYI. So I got connected with those guys who are all connected to growers in Mendo. Because like in California and in Hawaii, the guys that were like competing and practicing jujitsu all the time, they made their money off growing and selling weed, so they could just do jujitsu all the time. So when I moved out here, I came out here for music, but I moved into a big warehouse in Huntington Park that we were going to turn into like a green screen stage. And we were filming this show for this guy named Ed Suarez, who is the manager for Anderson Silva. And so I got to hang out with all those guys. And he had a clothing brand called Sinister. I did a bunch of t-shirt designs for him. I did a bunch of video production for them. And I worked with Scott Nelson, and we were building this whole show up. And we built a green screen stage and connected with all those guys. But the first night I moved here, I'm like in a Latino dominant area at Huntington Park. You know, I'm a white dude from Florida. I come out here, I roll up to this building, and there's like a Art Deco building in the front, and this fucking guy walks by me as I'm unloading the U-Haul, and I'm like, holy shit, that looks just like Pat Smear. Pat Smear is a guitar player. I was in a band called The Germs that inspired Nirvana, and then he went on to play with Nirvana. He was the other guitar player in Nirvana, and then started Foo Fighters with Dave Grohl. So fucking Pat Smear walks right by me. I'm in the hood. I'm like, what the fuck? So I walk up. I'm like, I put this down. I'm like, I go white, you know? And I walk up to him. He's outside smoking a cigarette. I'm like, hey, are you Pat Smear? And he goes, yeah, why? You know, because he's kind of got this artistic fun. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing here? He's like, my band, The Germs, practices here. I'm like, what? So like the most legendary punk rock band is practicing in the warehouse, in the front of the warehouse row that I just moved into. And that warehouse ended up being my first grow in LA very quickly, soon after that. And I was just smoking weed with The Germs all the time.
Oh, that's
amazing.
awesome.
So there was this front Art Deco building that had lockouts for band rehearsals, and they did music videos and filming and stuff like that. And so then Don Bowles Don Bowles a drummer, and he comes down and he's like this skinny little punk rock guy, like a relic. And I'm talking to him. He's telling me everything else. And he looks at me and goes, hey, you want to smoke some DMT? And I'm like, what the fuck is DMT? He's like, just imagine you die, but you don't.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm kind of interested. Can I take a look at it? You know, I'm like, why not? You know, I was doing crazy shit then. You know, I was dropping acid and getting on flights and filming Russian mixed martial arts events, you know, doing stupid shit like that. So I went up there and he pulls out this big ass strobe light, turns it on, and then hands me like a crack pipe with the DMT in it. And he's like, all right, I'm going to hit you with the strobe light right when you hit it. I'm like, nah, I'm good. I'm like, what the fuck are you trying to do to me? And I'm in this like weird ass fucking room with all this punk rock memorabilia and like weird dolls pinned up and taxidermy, just like a weird, you know, punk rock grody room that you would see like out of a fucking movie. And I'm like, no, but I'll smoke some weed with you. So Don ended up being like the guy that would always come over and hang out in the front room of the grow and just wait for me to hand him an ounce. And he would just sit there all day long until I would give him free weed. And then I'd be like, Don, you want to trim? He's like, nah, I'm just like, what you got? You got any table scraps, you know? So that whole area over there ended up being one of the coolest experiences because we ended up shooting all these music videos there, shot a Snoop Dogg video. Got to jam with Snoop Dogg because I had the whole rehearsal space down there. And I was like, Snoop, I'm on Geffen. Now I'm a developing artist. And he's like, you on Geffen? I'm like, yeah, I got pictures of it. I'll show you. And he's like, when are we going to make some music? I'm like, I got a whole space down here we can jam. And then we ended up jamming for like 6 fucking hours, delayed the whole music video, smoking blunt after blunt, first time drinking Hennessy, you know, and all of his crew from Long Beach was there. I mean, there were guys rolling around in wheelchairs, like, whatever, you know, he pulled up in this dusty ass Bentley. I'll never forget that. And, you know, we did that. There was a bunch of like really awesome, we did this one music video for Beirut and Rachel McAdams was in the video. And then like Ryan Gosling came, this is like way early. So next thing I got Rachel Adams, Ryan Gosling, this was before he even became huge. And they're all helping put the music video together. So it's like I move out here and then all of a sudden I'm around all this incredible talent. For me, like most exciting thing is Mars Volta rented out our warehouse for 2 weeks and did a whole music video series in our warehouse. And I was hanging out with Omar and Cedric and their whole band, and their band would do jazz sets every night wherever they were. And so I set up, they were rehearsing their jazz gig every day in my rehearsal room. And I get to fucking sit there and smoke weed and watch like some of the greatest musicians alive.
What's insane is like you did that with a bunch of DVDs.
Yeah.
And learning how to make videos. Yeah. With some weed, coffee, and DVDs, and just like now
that's where
you're
it started.
Like shooting production.
And we would do discounts for USC guys. So like there was this cat Hero who wrote and directed Atlanta. He shot my music video. He shot all his early projects here. A guy named David Gelb who produced and directed Hero Dreams of Sushi, which won a fucking Oscar. This guy named Ace Norton. All these young guys that were coming out of college, this was like the spot where they would use that to shoot their videos. We did the coolest A$AP Rock video. I don't know if you're into like some of the independent hip hop, But the song's called None Shall Pass. We did like a whole zombie thing. We had like 300 people there all dressed up as zombies.
And
we had
while
ATVs.
while you're running this video and music production, you're growing weed next door.
Yeah, I had like a 6-lighter. No, I built a loft, and so I had to grow in the production studio, and I was learning how to grow.
Because getting good weed back then was very difficult.
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And the thing for me is like our power bill was already like $6-7 a month because of the film studio. So it was the perfect cover. And there was always people smoking weed there. So it was just kind of worked out. And then we would we would rent out all the warehouses in the front building for all like the early dubstep artists. So like a lot of the early dubstep shows happen in Huntington Park off Soto and Slauson. And there was like a whole, there was a guy that was really dialed in with the lighting. He was doing like new laser technology, and he worked out of that space. And he got tied in with all the electronic artists there. And that's when we started running for those shows. So we were doing raves there. And and because this is the fucking craziest thing. Side note. So one day there's a knock on the door. We got like 200 pounds of weed because we got the guys down from Mendo here. And up in the loft, just full of turkey bags. We get a knock on the door, and there's a cop in the front, right? And so I open up the door. I'm like, fuck, I call Scotty. There's a cop down here. Da, 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 da. So Scott opens up the door, and Scott's cool as a cucumber with this guy. I mean, I learned like game from him. One of the coolest tricks Scott told me is if you ever get pulled over, start picking your nose and pull out a fucking nasty goober while the cop's talking to you, and he'll just fucking get back in his car and walk away. He'll never ask for your license.
It's good
like
strategy.
Do something gross, and the cop's
strategy.
like, nah, I'm fucking cool,
Yeah.
It's like the COVID trick now. I have COVID, So this cop's like, what are you guys doing in here? He's like, oh, we got a video production studio, this and that. And he's like, well, yeah, like what kind of videos are you shooting? Like what's going on? He's like, oh, MMA, jujitsu. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, see the On the Mat sticker? That was Scott's company at the time. It's like, you guys affiliated with On the Mat? And Scott's like, that's my company. And then the cop just melted. What? You're Scott Nelson? And he starts doing jujitsu moves in front of him and all this. And then all of a sudden, this cop there was like, treated Scott like he was God. And then they did all these training videos, which is terrible now if you think about it, like teaching the police how to like effectively choke out people.
After that relationship.
Yeah. Like, no,
did you guys do them in the studio?
I didn't have anything to do with that, but I just want to say that. But I observed like
why there's 200
like that cop looked at me as like a weirdo musician guy.
Yeah.
But Scott became friends with him, and when that spot got compromised, God bless Scott, I got a call. Hey, I got a call from Officer Dave. They're raiding you this day. And I had like 48 hours to turn everything off, shut everything down, get everything out, and clear it all out. So I call it the jiu-jitsu mafia, which is like where cops and weed growers would go roll together. And that might have been why so much weed ended up, why there were so many cops that were silent investors in dispensaries. It might have been through that whole fight world. I think that we've, this is kind of a touchy subject. And I've said a lot about like, law enforcement in the cannabis space. It's been, kind of a weird thing, but everyone's people, right? They're all people.
100%.
Right. And, there probably were a lot of law enforcement that looked at this whole thing as this whole war on drugs as being a lie. Right. And I don't know. I mean, I was definitely very grateful for that phone call, because I've had a couple incredible near misses in this industry. And one of the things I think's protected me is I never went too big and I never got too greedy. Everyone I saw that was like chasing money heavy, even still, like I've been a turtle at this, and I've been able to walk away from it and go do other things, if I needed to. I just loved the science. I loved the development. I loved the exploration of it. And I liked the danger. It was exciting, like growing up, it's a lot of people living a lie, and it was boring. And you really get to meet the real world in this space. And I think you learn a lot more. And I think there's a lot that we could take from our experiences that would help the world be a better place. because you've got like the lie of what everything is. And then you've got the world that most of us have been kind of existing in about how things really are going on, you know?
Yeah, there's, just like in every culture or every, group of people, there's good people and there's, not so good.
Yep.
And it's the same way with cops.
Yep, 100%.
There's great cops and then there's some not so good cops.
And there's a culture around it. And we see what happens when we, look at the current situation in California. It's pretty terrible, as far as a lot of the areas. Like when I was in LA in the 2000s, it was very different than it is now, and we don't want complete chaos.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, like you said, like you just said, people are just people. But I grew up with a guy that's on the SWAT team right now, and we hang out occasionally. We're not really close, but when I do hang out with him at my buddy's barbecue or this or that, the stories that he tells me that he has to deal with being a cop every day, and the shit that he sees on a daily basis, they go through a lot of stress.
It's
constant mental stress. So it's like, at the end of the day, just be cool.
Just be cool.
Just be cool be cool with everybody. But, I just respect, I'm big on respect, and if you just show respect and keep your head low and keep your mouth shut, like you shouldn't have any problems.
I think the issue with it is everything's just moved towards extremes. And then that creates a culture within every group, including law enforcement. And in a way, I look at like the ag cab, all the protests, everything. A lot of law enforcement is like, oh, you don't want any of our help? All right, cool. We're going to step out of this. Let's see how it goes. Oh, that guy just robbed you? Oh, maybe I won't go after him.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot in it for them because there's a lot of, there's no reciprocity. And in the same token, I think there's been a pretty sick culture in law enforcement that I've witnessed firsthand. I have had horrible, I've had experiences with cops where my entire life has been changed unfairly. Like I had law enforcement try and plant drugs on me once. I was in a situation where I was just fucking full compliance. I hope I make it through this, right? Whatever you say, officer. But them trying to get me to touch packages of drugs, like handing it to me. Hey, what do you think this is? While I'm arrested.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, that's not mine. He goes, come on, Lindsley. What do you think? I'm trying to fuck with you? Take it. I just want you to tell me what you think this is. Officer, I have no idea what this is. No, I don't think you're trying to fuck with me. I think you're just trying to do your job, but that's not mine and I'm not going to touch it.
Yeah.
And having them hold me there and fuck with me, waiting for me to say something, right? And I've been in a situation where I got arrested by 3 cops for no cause, right? And I've had situations like that, and that triggered a whole series of events where I almost lost my life. So I think the problem is it's like you have the degeneration of our society to some extent, which is creating, real extremes in the culture. And then, do you walk around? I mean, I won't ask you this, but like you're walking around with a gun all the time. You get a sense, you get a feel, you have a power there, right? So if you're someone that intrinsically feels powerless and you become law enforcement to feel powerful, it's fucking dangerous.
Yeah, 100%.
And that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there that are trying to do good public service and all of that. But so much of our society is just complete and total fucking bullshit. Right. And if you've got, an IQ over 100, you can see that there's just a lot of bullshit going on and that the social contract is kind of degenerated quite a bit. So I don't think I think we have to have intelligent, thoughtful conversations about it. I think we have to say what it is. But I think that the more emotional people are getting about it, the worse it's getting, the more extreme it's getting. I was in Pittsburgh when in a hotel room watching like, whoever was down there throwing Molotov cocktails at fucking buildings and seeing the police come in, state police come in, like, front row seat watching some of this shit go down. And it was scary, but more so it was incredibly disturbing because I was watching the agreement that we have to be in a society together where there's some sort of order completely fall apart. And both you and I have kind of been, a couple shades out of that order because the lie of prohibition on cannabis.
But
all of that.
I mean, couple shades out, but still respectful.
Right.
That's the thing.
We're not going to robbing people.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not. I mean, this part of the thing for me, like with the journey with cannabis is trying cannabis being like, oh shit, this is helping me in some ways. I could see how it could hurt me, but it's helping me. And there's a lot worse things out here. And why is this evil? Why is this demonized? Why is this not allowed? Because of a lie. All right. Well, what else is a lie? You start looking at things like that. You start peeling it back. It's probably why there's so many libertarians and conspiracy theorists in the weed space, because once you start working, if you were working with this plant when it was illegal, and you kind of step into a different world as far as the way you see everything.
Yeah.
Like my optics on the world changed. I would say it was deeper, it was richer, and it was more authentic. And now it's more socially acceptable. Arguably, optically and socially, it's legal, right? Like even though it's not federally legal, like people don't, like you can go outside and smoke a joint.
It's legal.
Socially, it's legal. Yeah, socially permitted. Whereas like growing up, it
wasn't accepted.
No,
you were outside of your family.
You had to hide your consumption.
Yeah.
It was if I got caught with an ounce of Florida, it was a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. And that created a whole culture that was part of the police culture in the police state. And it's going to take a long time to untangle all that. There's no quick flip. I think everyone was like, they'll hear a politician say, we're going to do this, this, and this. I'm like, no, there's a whole long road of detangling decades of lies and bullshit to the point where it's actually going to be normalized. And that's part of the reason why a lot of these legalization programs in the states fall apart, because they have no idea what they're doing. Like they have no idea what they're up against. Look at New York. They have no idea what they're up against. They're going to detangle an entire economy and culture that's been built around this by just like having a couple conversations and licensing. Come on.
No. It's been heavy.
And it's why you see the healthier programs are in the states that probably had harder prohibition laws, and it was more restricted, and it slowly opened up. And people have been upset about that because it's a lot harder for guys like me and other people that don't have the capital to get into these markets to participate in it. It's like there's boundaries there. All these big MSOs came in. Like, what the fuck? They don't represent us. But at the same time, it slowed down all of the nonsense. There's a benefit to how some of this stuff rolled out. And now would be the time you can come in and start creating those opportunities. But, California, New York, it's a fucking mess.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
But it looks like they just closed down 100 illegal shops in New York just recently.
They did. But that's the thing. It's going to take heavy enforcement, right? And now in California, we're kind of in a pickle because to fix the flagrant behavior here, that's going to destroy the entire industry here.
Yeah.
Because like they let this stuff go on here for a decade now. Whereas New York, they're like, oh, we're going to have to fix this now. They got that governor over there in New York and the mayor in New York, all that. They're really working hard because so many people invested so much money into that legal market. But in California, they just like stumbled around and there's a whole lot of money moving around.
Yeah. It's not being tracked.
It could be going into politicians' pockets is my guess. I'm sure the corruption goes all the way at the top here. And all you have to do is start looking into things like the Home Key program, the Housing the Homeless program.
Yeah. Yep.
Like $650,000 for a little ADU.
Yeah.
Where's all that going?
Yeah.
Exactly. Who's running that? Oh, Google's a part of it? What is going on? Why is big tech building the houses for the homeless? Yeah. And how come they're 10 times more than what it would cost for me to buy at MSRP off the shelf right now? and how come none of the homeless are actually being housed?
Yeah.
But all the money went out. And you look at that with all these programs, and this contributes more to the degeneration of the social contract, which is the agreement like, hey, we're going to trust the government to create order. And then we're going to have some rights and we're going to have the ability to do business and take care of our family. But once that goes away and then the enforcement around the order is still there, but the order doesn't exist, you got a big fucking problem.
Being from the cannabis industry and the culture, where do you think most growers lie? Do you think they lean towards conspiracy or more libertarian? Because if you really look at it as cultivators, we already don't have a lot of trust for the government.
No, I think most growers have been, I mean, I'm going to talk about growers now and from the last 20, 30 years. Okay. Like there's a new generation of growers that are coming up that are learning at these big facilities. Maybe they work for these big MSOs. That's a whole different generation now.
It's a whole new culture.
A whole new culture. And none of the old growers are really doing a great job fostering that new generation. Right. I'll tell you that much because of our past trauma, the libertarianism, not trusting this new, seeing an us versus them thing across generations, across paradigms, all of that. But most growers that I know, including myself, are going to be less trustworthy of fucking everything.
Yes.
Because we have seen the fucking doublespeak. We have seen the shit where we were like, oh yeah, that's how it is.
Yeah. You've lived it. You've been in it.
We all lived it.
Yeah.
Like human behavior, Aldous Huxley said it best. Every man is trying to escape his sweating self. And there's certain ways that we're going to allow you to escape yourself. And there's other ways we're not. And this is one of the ways that, some group of rich white dudes back in the 20s decided you can't do that anymore, essentially. I mean, it was yellow journalism, Randall Hearst, all that, right? And that was decided and that got created. And now we're here. And then there's a whole business connected to that. And that's the thing. It's like, there's a lot of people where I'm like, you don't know about Freeway Ricky Ross. You don't know about, you haven't seen that movie. I was like, watch that movie, Kill the Messenger, right? Like, you haven't read any of those books. Like, that's real. They're, the government does what it deems it has to do to move through a mission, which means there's no rules. We get those rules. But if we're fighting communism or whatever, there's no rules, And I think that are you an 80s kid too?
Yeah, I 85.
You're 85. So for me, the big moment was waking up to go to class. It was my freshman year in college. And a good friend of mine called me up, turn on the news right now. A plane just hit the fucking World Trade Center.
Yeah, I was in high school. I was just getting ready for school.
Right. We were all getting ready for school and we turned that on. And that was the moment where I was like, what? Like, do you remember that feeling?
Yes. Yeah.
And then immediately after that, everyone's like, America, fuck yeah, everywhere, everyone. It was like all of a sudden it became a brand that I never even knew about. And everyone was just pumped up, but it wasn't real. Because if it was real, it would have lasted. It was a response to something completely fracturing and fragmenting and falling apart. And that was this idea that we had. And then nothing made sense after that. Like, I was like, what? What are we doing? What are we doing? And now the same politicians that were speaking out about the Iraq war and everything, they're all pro-Ukraine war now. And it's like, nothing changes. It's all bullshit. It's all about.
It's all a narrative.
It's all about the global economy. It's all about this power, that power. It's in all of that. So all of that is also fundamental to the philosophy around the social contract. So part of the thing for me is like, the more that perception of what was real, whether it was in the Christian church, whether it was the government, whether it was the school systems, once that just starts ticking apart, I dropped out of college one day. was sitting in class and I had this realization, shit, this is just a degree factory. That's all this is. You come in and they just pump out degrees, but I'm not really getting anything here, that I'm going to use. So I remember sitting in this class and I just took inventory. What do I want to do? And I wrote a list out, and I wrote the list of what my goals were. And then I put another list down. Does any of what I want to do, anything I'm doing now in school, have anything to do with that? Is it going to get me there? No. And I got up, I left my bag there, I left my books there, and I just walked out of the class and I never went back. And I was friends with the literature teacher, and, they were like, they were paying me money. I just left it all. I was just like, fuck this. I'm going to go work on this album I'd rather be working on right now. And I ran into like one of my literature teachers at the gym, and the school had been trying to call me, and I'm like, I don't want anything to do with it anymore. Like, I'm done. And I ran into my literature teacher at the gym, and he's like, the school thought I had killed myself or something. I'm like, no. I'll go in and tell him I'm fine. I don't think there's any value of me finishing this degree. Yeah. I cannot figure it out. Like, it's a lie. And then we had this conversation, and it's like that. Now, every single one of my friends that continued with their college, they're still in fucking debt.
Yeah.
They're still in fucking debt. Like, what? They're still paying off that shit, and none of them are using the degrees they got. Right? And I was just thinking, like, damn, I'm glad I didn't go to one of those schools. And so
I think it's been, the college thing's been pushed on us as a society.
What mattered before?
From as kids.
It mattered before.
Yeah. As kids, I remember, my parents didn't have a ton of money, and I just knew I wasn't going to college. Yeah. And I remember being in high school, and they'd, do these, when you're a senior and a junior, they have the different colleges come talk to the high school. Hey, this is, what's up? And then my friends would ask me, what college are you going to? I'm like, I'm not going to college.
Right.
And then the counselor, you go with the counselor, and they're, so what's your next plan? What college are you going to?
You've done okay without college, huh?
Yeah. And
arguably. Yeah.
And even as a junior, a senior in high school, I just understood that I wasn't going to college. And I would let them know. It's like, I'm not going to college. And they're like, you're not going to college.
Right.
Like, what is wrong with you?
And that was what was going on in high school too, because by the time you hit freshman, they're putting that in you.
Yeah.
And that all your value
is college.
And that was the thing for me, where I just started going, and I got kicked out of my first high school, and then I had to move to a big high school. So I was at a smaller Christian high school, and like very early on, I was just in trouble all the time. And they did mid-year, they're like, this isn't the right school for you. No, let's change it up. And so I went to a school that had like 6,500 kids. It's a huge high school. And that was the best experience. But when I got there, like, I saw a different version of the lie. And it was just, because I got there, I was from a private school. So they immediately started fast tracking me, like put me on student council, all this stuff, because I was asking the teachers questions, and none of the other kids were asking about things that were going on. And they're like, would you like to be a part of I'm like, sure, this is the path towards going to college. And then like what I saw there was just more bullshit. And I dropped out of that real quick. Yeah. And, and then, like music was, music, and everyone that I played music with too. My next door neighbor was Eric Andre. We played in bands together all the time. But it was a real thing, Yeah. And he did all that crazy shit he does on that show. People ask me, what was he like? Yeah, they did the same stuff. He was, doing all kinds of gross shit, but that was more real, and that felt alive. And so when you come out of something that feels dead, but everyone's telling you it's alive, which was, outlaw, counterculture, where people could be themselves. I could be myself, right? That's the thing. Like, that's why I still love LA too. I can come down to LA, I can be myself and talk to anybody. You go to other places, go to these other states, people are still in that, whatever that paradigm is.
Yeah.
Like, this is how the world is.
I think it's really important for the, especially as a kid it's okay to ask questions and think for yourself. Like even with what you're being told, it's like, is that the right path? Even though you're being like just drilled with it, right? Like, is this the right path for me?
And that's happening. Like, the kids now are getting drilled with a new thought process, but the mechanism and the manner of how it's happening is no different to me than growing up in a religious background. Like, it's still the same ways of thought control. And this isn't to discount or discredit, like, as I've gotten older, like the New Testament and Jesus' words have meant more to me now. But I had to escape the
religion.
I had to escape the religion for me to understand the symbolism, the meaning of it, how violence isn't the answer, right? Like, that violence just creates more violence. Like, once you begin a cycle of violence, it's really hard to get out of it. And just all those stories have meant a lot more to me now. But that was through a lot of ups and downs, and also just coming out, like, when you grow up and you've got all these adults that are creating a container for you and then telling you what you have to believe without there being any room of exception. And then there being like this immaterial or conceptual idea of like burning in hell.
Yeah.
All that. Like, I look at like hell as a state of being now. But when you're a kid, and then, I would always ask questions and I would cause problems. I've always caused problems by asking questions because I'd just be over there scratching my head. But and I think that the other thing too, it's like when you grow up that way, I still have a part of me that is deeply still rooted in that I don't think I'll ever fully escape. So I have to question myself all the time. Like, am I seeing it this way because of how I was conditioned as a child, or because it's objectively true?
Yeah.
Right. And working with
questioning yourself.
Right. But that's the thing for me. My journey with cannabis was like, make money so I can do music. And then it became, grow plants and learn about the universe. Because you really see cause and effect.
Yeah.
Right. And you really, you see what you put into something, what comes out of it. And then there's an understanding of all those patterns. And that was like all those first conversations with Tad. Like, I was high off of seeing more and more of these parallels in the garden with life. Right. And in a way, looking at it now, it is kind of biblical because we were supposed to caretake the garden. Right. And what was the gift? The gift of that is like, you take care of the garden, you learn about the universe, and then you become bigger. Your understanding of life becomes bigger and more truth is revealed to you.
Yeah. It connects you with nature.
Right. And it's not to worship. I see a lot of people that worship cannabis, right? No. We're above plants as far as consciousness hierarchy, but that doesn't mean that plant life doesn't have a consciousness. That doesn't mean that plant life isn't there to teach us a different rhythm and teach us things that we need to be bringing into our life to escape this lie. Like, there's a fake world that's been put over the natural world that we're just in all the fucking time. And now, people are shortcutting that with psychedelics, in my opinion, which I did. I totally was like, okay, let's go down the road, because you do psychedelics and you get a lot of that information really quickly because all those filters come off chemically. And then you're flooded with all of this. And then you have like this rapid, very quick form of enlightenment, which could either be hell or heaven, depending upon where you're at. But really, the better path is just to be meditating with things that are alive and caretaking them so you can understand how your actions, what your causes create what effect. And then from that, that's everything else is opened up. And that's one of the things that's been the most beautiful thing about the prohibition about cannabis, is that you got people in every place, like all the tent growers, all the guys growing,
all connecting with plants, all connecting with nature.
And it's mostly been the guys that have been growing, been the people that have had less resources, that have been doing it because there haven't been options. they didn't get the education. They're not learning about biology and chemistry from school. They're learning about it by working with the plant. And then the effect and the relief that the experience of the plant gives them from their sweating self in the fucking hell that they're existing in, then opens up more truth of the universe, which then changes their life condition and how they have a relationship with the outside world. If you're going to tell me that's not God's work, what the fuck is?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love it.
And
With that.
and that came
100% right.
So it's like you can look at like the cost of prohibition, but every cost has a benefit. Every benefit has a cost. And that's one of the benefits. And that's one of the things that I look at with this new generation of kids coming up that want to be a part of this space. Like, we got to pass those lessons on, right? If it just becomes about like getting high and being a part of some
or money
escape culture or money, you're missing the real value. You're missing the part of it that, you know, and that's been the thing in my life. Like, I've been able to sit down with anybody from any place in the world, any level of life, and inside of music and inside of weed, like, I can connect with anybody. If I'm jamming to a good song and they're there and they're jamming a good song and we connect, there's joy there. If I got a good fucking awesome strain with a new profile and we're sharing that and we're talking about that, there's joy there. Then it doesn't matter where you come from.
Yeah.
You know, and I've had that experience with like some of the most powerful celebrities and, you know, guys in the fucking gnarliest gangs and cartels. And that's like where God works. Right. And that's the great thing. Now, you can get lost in all of that stuff, but it's just really highlighting that opportunity for us to come together and for there to be that evolution through collaboration, which is what we started talking. I don't know if you filmed that, but like how like the most advanced steps in evolution happen through collaboration, not through competition.
Yeah.
You know, competition might drive that point, and like competition might be the driver that essentially creates a forced collab, but that's where those next levels happen.
Yep.
Right. So, you know, that's been a part of the experience. And then for me, and then working with the garden opened me up to experimentation with more substances, which were a part of my life for a while. They're no longer anymore because I have a very different experience of it. You know, I got to see the cost of taking really extreme psychedelics and thinking that was going to be a way to fix things with me, you know, and to improve myself or to get through past trauma. And I think psychedelics, I think what's happening with the psychedelic movement is terrifying right now, that it's being commercialized so quickly.
What section of psychedelics, like psilocybin and mushrooms, or like other kind of psychedelics?
I think we all have to look at them a little bit differently. And that's the thing that's not really happening, right? So it's like they're all being kind of grouped together as
under the name drug.
Well, under the name psychedelics, really, right? Yeah. So like we're seeing a roll, like what the rollback of cannabis prohibition is doing socially is having everyone rethink how we look at substances overall, which is a positive thing. But the problem is the same problem we had with cannabis, which you got these profiteers that are coming in. And there's a good argument to be made that all that speculative investment, all these Wall Street crooks that came in, all these guys that came in and pumped all this money early into cannabis has created, you know, majority of the problems because of chasing greed, not chasing that universal understanding that these things can open us up to. More so, I would argue that you get more value spiritually and personally out of cultivating these plants than understanding the relationship they have when you take them, right? But creating a bunch of consumer packaged goods over things that have been used in sacred rituals for thousands of years, and then turning it into a fucking Diet Coke, bro, it's not going to work. Yeah. It's going to be a fucking disaster.
Yeah,
and so I look at all this, and we talked a little bit about it because like I tried to escape. There was a period of my life where everything was falling apart. Lost the record deal, was in a really tough personal situation. And, I started growing for this group and they were like a private collective. You know, everyone was getting raided. This was around 2010, 2011. We had these phases in Prop 215 where everything would be good for like 6 months. And then LA Times would be like, there's more weed dispensaries than Starbucks, McDonald's, Taco Bell combined. What are we going to do about this problem? And we would all be like, please, nothing. You know, I'm getting $3,200 a pound right now.
Yeah.
Please don't do anything. You know. And then they would come in and raid everybody. And then if you had anything on the arm, if you were fronting to a dispensary, so I would work with dispensaries, get contracts with them, and I would get paid like every 30 days. And then I was just looking for consistent partnerships with dispensaries at the time where I could trust them. You know, because there's nothing scarier than walking out of some shady dispensary in the valley with no protection, and you're walking in with like 50 pounds and walking out with like 150 grand. And that like 100-foot walk to the car, like was the walk where you were like,
yeah, I remember that
your
walk.
fucking heart's beating in your fucking ears. And you're like, I got to make it to the car. Because that's when you get robbed. That's when you get jacked. That's when you get shot, all those kinds of things. It wasn't in the grow. It was in that transactional process. So for me, like I was a young father. I was like, I really believed in moving forward on legalization because I understood the value that I was getting from the plant overall, right? All the stuff we're talking about, starting to dawn on me then. And I still wanted to like try and fund a music career because when, you know, Geffen basically folded an Island Def Jam and they dropped all the developing artists. We were in the middle of mastering our album, and it was like overnight went from hero to zero. And I'm like, fuck this. I'm never going to work with a label again. I'm going to fund it myself, you know, go back to the original plan. You know, that didn't work out because I got completely obsessed with cultivating cannabis and stopped playing music for a period of time. Like I just went fully into it all. But you know, the hardest part was getting those consistent relationships. You know, everyone had their own little tribe, right? As far as who would work with who. You had to be careful about it. There was a lot of people in the valley that were all mixed up in a bunch of other stuff. You know, like there was like a lot of the weed people in the valley were also part of the porn industry and everything that went along with that, which was not always really great. And so you had to be kind of careful about who you worked with. And I was just looking for people that shared the same philosophy that I did around the plant and around the product and enjoyed all parts of the process. But those guys would get shut down. And so through a few friends and a family member, I connected with these guys that allegedly had like this private collective. So I started growing for them, got closer to them. And then one night I was like going through something and I was either dropping off weed or picking up money from them. And the main guy just like looked at me, looked through me. You know, they were a little weird, right? They were a little weird. They were like into crystals. They had like a strange motley group of people, like older women and, you know, 20-year-old guys that would hang out with them. And they were kind of new agey and woo-woo. And, you know, he basically had this really intense conversation with me. And I was in like a manic moment at the time, and it resonated with me. And then they invited me to do like a journey with them. Now I had already kind of experimented with psychedelics on my own. And had gotten some value out of it. And at the time I was just at a super low, like I was at that point where I was, you know, I was miserable as a person. And I think what happened was like, when you get a record deal, at least back then, like you get like the biggest ego shot ever, you know, and you're hanging and, you know, you got all these people telling you, you know, what your career is going to look like and everything else. And I was, you know, hanging out with, you know, some of the coolest artists in the world. And, you know, you build an idea of yourself, you know, and that's why like a lot of people, again, the music industry young, they get ruined by it because what they're really creating is a false projection. And that's that product that the music industry is going to sell. But you believe that that's you, but that's not you. Most people are fucked up. You know, and you got to get through all that stuff before you can have that kind of attention. So I got to that very tip of that, and then it all went away overnight. So that false ego, that highly toxic narcissist rock star version of myself.
You were in your 20s?
Yeah, I was in my 20s.
Yeah, I think in your 20s, you're really vulnerable to ego.
Right.
Right.
And we were living like Entourage,
all
know?
of us.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, when you get into your 30s to mid 30s, you kind of figure out none of that shit matters.
Right.
Like, I don't like status. I mean, some people are stuck on status or ego or whatever, but
it's a lot of it in the cannabis, because in the cannabis world, it's kind of been funny because it's like, I've had the opportunity to experience being more of a rock star here than the music industry.
You're a rock star in the cannabis industry.
And for me, it's always weird when people say it's humbling. I'm like, no, it's not humbling. That's building your ego up. It's the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
It's cool. Like I love it, and I try and use it in a positive way. I mean, I've been a real fucking shit starter online, but when I meet people in real life, it's just, where you at? Let's talk, whatever. It's human to human. It's the same reason why like music and weed connects everybody from every place. And that's been the beautiful part about it. And, I love going to the events and hanging out with people and getting to know people.
So in your 20s, like you were, like we're all vulnerable to that.
Right.
We're all vulnerable to the ego.
Right.
Right. And,
and most of us are running from whatever bullshit trauma we grew up with.
Yep.
Like we haven't got, like you come out of high school and you start partying, you start doing stuff, you start
trying to find your way.
Yeah. You start taking risks, but most of us didn't come up with the tools to figure out, especially my family has just like a dark complexity to it. Where there's a lot of nasty stuff, and it was much easier for me at 17 to just leave my house and be like, fuck all this.
Yeah.
I'm going to go and do my own thing. But that doesn't mean that I dealt with the weird trauma or whatever people want to call it. Like the darkness, like the darkness doesn't go away just because you want to pretend like it's not there.
No,
you still have to understand what it is, confront it, and pull that shit out of you.
Yeah.
You
got to be conscious of it.
Right.
Yeah. And because your upbringing stays with you. I don't care who you are.
Right.
It always stays with you. And sometimes it takes psychedelics to grasp it.
Well, that's the thing for me. Psychedelics became a way for me to see that life is much bigger than just my experience and all of that. And psychedelics are a reminder that we're more than just a material being, that there is this whole interconnected world that we're a part of. But it's like taking a heavy dose of all that information at one time before you've actually done the work to hold it and earn it and ground it. So like these group of guys, that was the whole thing, is like they were going to take you on these journeys. They were like quote unquote shamans, right? I call them plastic shamans, but the whole idea behind it is they would take you through these journeys. You would set this intention, and then they would, help you work through those things so you can become your higher self. They had all this language I'd never heard before, religious language, essentially. Because most of these shaman groups, including this one, are just little cults, right?
Yeah.
And they're creating a new hierarchy and a power structure.
When you talk like that, it sounds like a cult.
It was a fucking cult. But in California, a lot of that is concealed around counterculture and alternative lifestyle, right? And now I look at the world and I see cults and a lot of things that I wouldn't have identified a cult now, just based off of the way that it's designed, structured, the messaging, all of it. I think politics are a cult now. And that's also how I feel about what's going on with the psychedelic movement, is people think that they can take psilocybin or ayahuasca or MDMA and shake free of their demons. You might experience the demon in that experience and think that you've gone through it. But no, it's just kind of like ringing a bell once, but it's not carrying the tone. Like psychedelics is just ringing the bell, you hear the tone, but really like you have to be the tone of change within yourself, which means understanding the parts of you that are dark. Like, right, if we go talk, we're not going to get too into psychology, but understanding, the whole idea of Jung and Carl Jung and all of that was understanding your shadow, right? Confronting it, being fully aware of what that is, and accepting what you are capable of fully embodied in your shadow, so it doesn't get expressed unconsciously, right? It's like, that's part of the thing with violence. If you get triggered emotionally and you let the demon out, you could ruin everything for yourself. But if you understand that darkness within you.
Thank you.
Then if you get triggered emotionally where you might unconsciously express something horrible and violent and destructive, that's less likely to happen if you understand what that is, you know?
If you're conscious of it.
If you're
it's
conscious
like The Power of Now. You've read that book?
Yeah, of course.
It's Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
It's great because you can observe yourself. You can observe your thoughts.
Right.
So if you can observe your thoughts, who's observing? Who's the one observing? Right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, I think that's really big.
Well, it's about understanding that we are all good and we are all evil, right? Like we all have the capacity of that. And then by observing and understanding those base reactive actions and desires, but also knowing what it creates, right? Going back to the garden, cause and effect. And that's been part of my journey, is understanding that more and more. Like I used to troll things I didn't like that I thought were undesirable online. And then I watched what that created. I mean, I had fun with it. I still laugh at some of it, but at the same time, I think it did a lot of harm to people who might have deserved it. But who am I, the person, to be the one to decide that? Number one. Number two, even if it was justifiable, that energy I put out there, and it will come back to me, because that is what I planted. That is the seed that I planted. So like this whole idea of being like an online Batman is ridiculous. Really the path now, especially after and we all kind of lost our minds during COVID. And I think that's when I started being like, fuck it, I'm going to say what I want. Yeah. You know, at the same time, and that developed a bigger audience for what I'm doing. And it was all feeding the same thing that's destroying our whole state of being collaboratively together. So now, after looking at what it created and sitting with the feeling, right? And I need psychedelics for this. Maybe I'll smoke a little bit of weed, and then I would sit with the discomfort that I created. And I would get over the ego part of it, because when I would put something out that would be like, you know, a flaming hot Cheeto of a post, everyone, you know, I would get addicted to the attention of that. And then that started to become my value and my identity. And then, like you were just talking about, reflecting upon that, looking at what that did. Wait, how am I creating myself right now? Do I like this? And then like I pulled this whole move where I started putting positive posts up about people and companies that people like to shit talk, right? I think I did one for Athena, right? I put a comment about what I saw you guys doing that was right. And at the time, you know, everyone in this industry likes to take down anybody that starts winning. You know, and it's a competitive strategy, you know, but it also then breeds a lot of mental illness, because then people start characterizing like a brand or a company in a specific way, and then everyone associated with it, and it gets real tribal, and it's not productive. So I tried to flip the script on that, and I got doxxed. I had people making, you know, digging up every dark part of my family, going after my wife. Like I got it back. Because I basically was like, I'm tired of this. Let me try something else. And then I also knew that I was going to reap what I sowed. I'm like, I planted a bunch of sick seeds. And then a lot of the people that were following me were the people that are the most unhappy with themselves. And then it's a lot easier to look at the outside environment and just blame that for why you're not happy. And it was really hard to go through all that. But it was something of a real shamanic experience.
Well, at least you were conscious enough to take a step back.
Right.
And really break down the kind of where you were getting your feeling of importance from, right?
Yeah, it did not have the value I wanted to create.
Yeah.
Because that's not where I started in the space. That's just where I got the most attention.
Yeah.
You know, where I started was focusing on
bringing people up, sharing education.
Yeah, and cultivation philosophy and tech. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, nobody even knew I did that. No one even knew that I was growing and working in this.
I always knew you did it because I was a fan. I was a fanboy long before you were.
And then everyone and then everyone like Tad would call me up. He's like, "You okay, buddy?" I'm like, "I'm just trying something out." He's like, "All right," you know. You know, people would be like, "What's going on with Nelson right now?" And for me, it was just, I guess I probably my life got hard again. And then when your life gets hard, you shouldn't be on social media. That's one thing I would say. Like that social media is a psychedelic drug, right? Because you're connecting.
An addictive one at that.
Well, yeah, you're connecting to a specific kind of collective consciousness the same way that you would if you were taking a really extreme psychedelic drug. So I guess I hadn't worked out all of my demon, right? And then that came up with this new form of connectivity. And I still like to make memes here and there because it's funny. I like the humor part of it, but the issue of it is that it's so easy to look at what's wrong and then make fun of it. It's really fucking hard to try and come up with something that can compete with what's not healthy and take its place. So that was the moment I had when I got Burner on the phone calling me to ask to take down meme posts. It's like, you're going to kill what I'm doing right now. And, I guess I felt like a lot of it was righteous, but at the same time, I just look at everybody's going to reap what they sow. And then I was realizing I was just planting the wrong seeds, And so I was like, let me see if I can come up with a positive post about Burner. And I really wasn't too into everything that guy had created in the space. I still will say this, that I think that overall what he's created has been a net negative for the cannabis culture. And I could talk about that in a way where it's thoughtful and not hateful. And I think a lot of the transitional guys from the black market to the legal market have tried to hang on to too much of the darkness that's on the street and bring that into the mainstream. And that's the worst thing that we could do for this business. But that's not for me to dole out social media justice. Everybody is going to get the fruit of what seed they planted.
Yeah.
And I might be able to put things together and see the patterns and see where it's going. But now my objective is just to find good people to work with. And let's do something different that feels better.
Yeah, do something positive.
Who cares what these people are doing?
Yeah,
who cares? Just let them do their thing. It's gonna play out how it plays out. Maybe they win, maybe they lose. Who cares? The world is small and also infinite.
Yeah, it's really important to stay conscious of how powerful your words are.
Right.
And with Athena and the team, I constantly reinforcing. We have a strict rule: we do not talk bad about anybody.
You guys are good at that.
Yeah.
Because I've definitely tried to bait every single one of your salespeople.
How'd they hold up?
Fucking perfect.
Yep.
I might get a raised eyebrow.
Yeah.
Like one of these.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where they're
yeah.
Okay, we're with you, but we're not going to say shit.
A lot of people do it to us. A lot of our competitors just beat us up nonstop. Right.
I see that.
It's nonstop. Yeah. But for us, for my dissemination to the team is just, look, we don't speak ill of anybody. It happened a while back, years ago, and I brought it up on a call, and I continue to reinforce it to where, look, we don't want to put that out in the universe like that. And you always get it when you're dealing with somebody, and if they talk bad about another brand or somebody or company, it feels dirty. Right. And I really don't think that helps the business.
Well, it's coming from a deficiency. So, for instance, and I can speak about this with myself, when I would go, and things still piss me off, right? But then I just talk about it with a select group of people where I can flush out my feelings on something and then figure out what the opportunity is in it. But a lot of it was coming from a place, again, shit would get under my skin and piss me off so much. But why? Right? Well, because there was something that I didn't have in my life that was filling up that space. Or it came from a past trauma. So in that, what ended up being a psychedelic cult, that guy that was running that whole thing, you know, I went on this journey with him, and it ended up just being, they were giving us experimental psychedelics. I don't even know what they are. They're some of the most powerful substances I've ever taken in my entire life, and different from DMT and different from ayahuasca and everything else I kind of, you know, experimented with before. But part of it was like this hierarchy thing. Like he was creating his own type of a narrative. And midway through, I realized what it was, you know, and he was hunting vulnerable people. And so for me, I would project, maybe it was a bit of a projection, but I would see people doing that in this space. And that's when I would get pissed off, because I went through hell getting out of that situation with those characters, and had to restart my whole life. Like saw the evil. Like I didn't really necessarily know if I believed in evil before that experience, but now I did after that. And I would start seeing guys in the cannabis space that were cult of personalities that like shared a little bit of that spirit lineage of a cult leader that I fucking hated, but I hadn't fully let go of my anger or the fact that I put myself in that situation, right? So part of it was like projecting out old wounds, right? From being in situations where I had given my power to somebody that was not worthy, and not only not worthy, just plain fucking evil. So I would see these patterns. And when you're in that situation, you know, I was in survival for about 3 years. You're hyper aware, but also I think I was like, and maybe one of the psychedelics that I took from them, like fucking flipped a switch for a minute. Cause like there was one journey I did with them where shit was not the same for a hot minute after that, you know.
Even after the experience.
After the experience, yeah, like my perception changed. I think it probably permanently changed to some extent, but that's okay. You figure out how to adapt to it and move through it. But you know, it's and that's the danger or the risk, maybe the risk of some of these substances is everyone's brain is different, right? You know, I've also had trauma once in my life too. So it's like you're playing around with some things and you don't know where it's going to go. And so I look at like, you know, again, I go back to look at the commercialization of a lot of the psychedelics. It's like, oof.
It's scary.
It can go sideways real quick, especially when overall the mental health of the world is at its all-time low. Things are a little bit more heated, a little more triggered. Let's give somebody a potent consciousness-altering substance that could turn things on and off that won't reset for a minute, right? So I think that like part of it too is just, you know, because when I came out of that situation in that cult, you know, I had like a period of time where to get out of that situation, I had to just basically walk away from everything. And I was homeless. I was like a government relief. I was living on the streets for about a month. And then I connected with, you know, some hippie dudes, you know, kind of lived that experience. And a little side note, I think that the only way you're going to solve, and any leader is going to solve the homeless problem is by going and living on the fucking streets and understanding what it is, because it's a completely different world. It's an underworld, you know, and, you know, going into government relief, they set you up in motel vouchers, they give you food stamps. And so I went on, in the motels that they put you in, like I was in the Bronco Motel in South Central, you know, and it's basically like bookies, prostitutes, and guys running whatever they're running out of there.
Yeah, so you're still into that same energy. It's all around you.
Yeah.
And you've got to pull your way out of it.
Correct. So I went from like a subliminal and pathological evil and darkness with that shaman group to like outward war, like being in South Central's war. And I'm a tall ass, fucking pasty ass white dude, right? Everybody there thought I was a cop. You know, I had guns pulled on me a number of times. Actually, I had one experience where I became friends with one of the guys that were in the motel on the other side of the little wing. And I went over there to hang out with him, and one of the guys that was with him thought I was a cop, and he pulled out a gun. And all I had left was my guitar and all of the seeds that I had made. Like I had my seed collection. And the guy had the gun out on me. He was convinced I was a cop. And I said, can I get something out of my bag? I'm going to give it to you. All right. And I pulled out this mason jar where I had all these vials of different seeds. And I said, look, I've been growing weed for the last 10 years, right? You think a cop? This is my seed collection. I went through everything. It's like pre-98 Master Kush times Coconut Kush. This is a Thailand race. I worked all this. I went into all the detail of it. I'm going to give you these seeds. Just don't shoot me. Now, would a cop have fucking weed seeds? Takes the seeds, fucking opens it up, looks at them. And he's like confused as fuck. And he goes, probably not. I'm like, cool. Can you put the gun away? He goes, yeah. And then everything calmed down.
Holy shit.
And I'm like, and now that is, I could argue, people say weed has saved people's lives. That shit saved my life because the dude that brought me over there was tripping that this guy was going to shoot me. He was trying to talk him down. That guy was like saying, shut the fuck up. This guy's a cop. This guy's a cop.
Where was this at?
This is at the Bronco Motel. Yeah. Which is, I think is like Slauson and Western, whatever. I've driven by there a couple times just to like, be like, fuck, I made it out.
How did you get in that situation?
Because that was when
with him pulling the gun on you.
Well, no, so what happened was like, basically when I started living on the streets, I let go of every personal possession I had, and just
with that group,
I just basically let everything go and walked away from it. And there was a lot of things that led up to that. I'll write a book about it one day. I'm not going to talk about it on this podcast.
Yeah.
I was pretty intense too. But when I let go of everything I owned, I experienced a freedom I had never felt in my life, to not have anything. And that like turned something on. It was like a psychedelic experience of its own, to not have any material things. Like I had my guitar and I had my bag with like some shit in it. And I was like, I was like picking fruit off of trees and getting avocados.
You found freedom in it.
Yeah, I found freedom in it. And I did a lot of survival camping and stuff like that growing up. And so I had experience surviving, been lost in the woods a few times. And I had like a period of my life during my teenage years where I was spending a lot of time in the Blue Ridge Mountains, hiked the Appalachian Trail. So for me, I was kind of looking at it as like a different version of that. But very quickly, I tried sleeping on the beach, and then I had like a group of people that I think if I had hung out long enough, we were going to try and kill me on the beach. I experienced like incredible moment of like threat trying to, the parks were a little bit easier to sleep in, but the beach was not. I thought the beach might be chill, but there's some weird shit that goes on the beach in California at night. And so the next morning I was talking about that with these like hippie, fucking homeless guys. And they said, you got to go to government relief. And that guy was like, no, was it really? You need to go to government relief. They emphatically told me that
they knew something was coming down the pipe.
Yeah, for me. Like I was not supposed to be out there. I couldn't handle myself, whatever. And so that I went into the GR, which is like in Santa Monica, and you wait in line, and then they put you into a job program, and then they give you like bus tokens and then motel vouchers. And then you get to pick. They give you a list of like what motels they have availability, and they're all in like the worst crime areas. So that's how I ended up there, because I was the only motel that had vacancy. So I guess the government has some deal with these motels and people shack up there. And so that's how I got to that motel. And then when I got there, it's a whole other scene. Everybody there's looking at me like, who the fuck is this guy? Right?
6'6"
white guy. Right. And so every day I would just get out of there and walk around and kind of get an understanding of the neighborhood. And, fucking pick fruit off trees and avocados and stack it up. And I was trying to like stay healthy. I had like bags of pomegranates. It'd be funny. Like sometimes someone would come up to me on the block there or whatever. And, fucking come up to me like they were going to hurt me. Like, what are you doing here? And I'd be like, you hungry? And he'd be like, what? And I'm like, here, have an avocado. And they'd be like, yo, you're the craziest white boy I've ever met. But that, like, me just being generous and not having any fear. And then they would, like, you know, be a pomegranate, banana, and apple, whatever they would eat in front of me. And they'd be like, what the fuck are you doing here? And then, but it would diffuse the threat.
Yeah.
Like, because it was just so off the wall. And so there were like 3 rooms that had like prostitutes in them. And then like, I heard this commotion and I go outside and this dude's beating up one of the prostitutes in the parking lot. And so it was like on an L. And so I was on this row and I look over and then there was all the gangster guys had this whole part of the motel and the prostitutes were next to me. I get anxiety talking about this. Fuck. And so I didn't have any fear at the time. Maybe I was just completely psychotic. But I went down and I got in the middle of the dude beating up the prostitute. And I just like...
Stepped right in the middle of it.
I stepped right in the middle of it. And I said something intense. I don't remember really what it was, but I just looked him in the eyes with no fear. And I said, you're going to leave right now. You know, and I was calm, but I was fierce. And this motherfucker looked at me like I was the craziest person he had ever met in his entire life. And he like rubbed his head, took a moment, fucking turned around and walked away. And the 3 gangster dudes were up there watching this whole thing happen. They're sitting there smoking fucking parliaments. He's like, come up here, smoke a cigar with us. What the fuck are you doing? And I'm like, he was beating up that lady. What the fuck are you doing? And I'm like, I don't give a shit. They're like, you're crazy. You know, and then they started taking me on runs where they would go to gas stations and like do drops. They had all these series of gas stations, do drops, pick up cash, this and that, started bringing me around. And they started asking me to help them with all this like tech shit. So what they would do is they wanted me, I didn't know this at the time, but they had me build like dating profiles for them online. And
like to date girls.
Yeah. So what they would do is they would do like casual encounters on Craigslist. And I would take pictures of them and then post all this and everything else. And what they were doing is they would go find white women that wanted to, you know, sleep with a black dude that were like rich white woman. And then they would do these things on these dating websites where they would go on the date and then rob the woman and come back with all her shit.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so they told me they were going to pay me for help. And the first time they did that, they came back and they like had a purse. They like gave me this woman's purse and her fucking phone. Bro. And I'm like, yo, I don't want anything to do with this. I didn't know you were doing that. I don't want this phone. He's like, no, this is your payment. I'm like, no, I'm good. I don't want any of that. Right. So I'm not going to tell this whole story. I might write about it one day. Yeah. But, you know, I was there for a bit and then there was a shootout there and those guys got into a shootout. And I just stayed in my motel room while it was all going down. But every night in that area, there was like automatic gunfire. But this time it was there. And then I woke up the next morning and all the windows were blown out in that motel room. And there was like blood all over the mattresses are on the fucking window. And there was like blood all over the place. But like no cops showed up. There was no bodies. And he had like his baby mama in there with like 3 fucking kids.
No cops showed up.
No cops showed up. The shit went down and then there was like everything, the whole room was turned up. There was blood everywhere. I don't know what happened. All I know is there was 3 kids in that space that were sleeping on that floor in the motel. And shit changed, you know? Like and that was the last I saw those guys. That was after a couple of weeks. And I was trying to be a positive influence at that point with the whole thing there. Cause I'm like, I'm stuck here and then I'm going to start this job program. Now, part of the reason why it's like, I was so ashamed you know, my family had kind of already blacklisted me. They didn't want anything to do with me because I grew weed. And then when I got involved with those guys, like, you know, my whole personal situation had fallen apart. I'm not going to get into details about that, but like I had a kid with a girlfriend. And then that just went south and it was a really unhealthy situation and I wasn't healthy. Now, I will say this now, I'm friends with my first son's mom. Everything worked out.
How'd you pull out of that?
So I called for help because things got real violent one night there. And I thought I had a near-death experience. And I knew I was probably like And I'm not going to talk about details about that if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I had a situation happen, and I reached out to my mom. I was like, Mom, I don't think I'm gonna be here for anymore. I just want to tell you goodbye, right? Something like that. I had called her a couple of days before this event happened. It's actually a crazy fucking story. So I'd call her after that shootout happened there. I'm just like, hey, like, I'm gonna get myself out of this situation or I'm not, But I had like not talked to my mom for like 2 or 3 years. I hadn't talked to my family for a while. And she's like, where are you? I'm like, I'm at a motel in South Central. I'm in government relief. I was homeless for a bit, but I'm going to come out of this. I was committed to coming out of this completely on my own. So I basically called my mom. I didn't talk to my dad at all at the time, just to say goodbye, right? If that happened, like that was where I was at, a real low point. And so the day before, this is what she told me. The day before this crazy event happened, a bird, she used to sit by this window in her house in Florida, and we shared a favorite song by Simon and Garfunkel because my mom was a hippie. It was called Sparrow. So the day before this crazy event happened, a sparrow flew in and landed on my mom's arm in the house and was just screaming at her. And she's like, I got to go to LA and find Nelson. That's what she told me, right? And so she called my dad. Hadn't talked to my dad for 20 years because they were divorced. And then she called my aunt, and that was the problem. My aunt was a cop. And so I had my phone off. I came out of the situation where I thought I was dying, and I turned on my phone. And right when I turned on my phone, my mom called. Hey, I'm here with your dad and your aunt. We just landed in LA. Where are you? We're coming to pick you up. And so they came and picked me up. And then a whole other fucking series of events happened. But that's how I got out of it.
That's how the initial got out.
That's how I got out of it. Yeah.
Dude, that's fucking heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is crazy.
Multiple close encounters of death.
And then after that, it didn't stop. Because I wasn't in my right. I was freaked the fuck out.
Still from leftover from what was happening with that group, that cult.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Because they were. I saw that the head of that group.
And it goes back to exactly what you said.
Yeah.
When you're doing a substance like.
Well, they did
psychedelics. It stays with you. It could stay with you.
It can stay with you for a while, but they had basically banned me from doing any more journeys with them. So it'd been like probably 6 to 7 months because I was active in that group for like 6 months, and then I figured out what was going on, and they banned me from participating in the rest of the group stuff. But they still wanted me to grow weed for their collective, and I was kind of locked into a situation. And then what happened was, the grow that I built out that I was running for them, I had to live in that grow because I was basically just coming up, starting over. The other grow I had to shut down, like I told you. And then we had a grow in Glendale. But this is a fucking crazy story too. I would work at night, sleep during the day, right? And I just turned on like more lights, put like all of my money into this spot. I had like 70 grand left, and I put it all into getting this spot going. And there was like a 400 amp panel that had never been used that was old, but it wasn't on a smart meter. And I'm like, shit, this is great. Like I might not get a power bill for this meter because they would just come by and read the 200 amp panels. So there's like total 600 amps. So I got this all going, deep water culture, crazy setup, hanging bulbs everywhere. And I turned on that breaker now and got this, it was the first day one, right? And I turned that on that night. And I shared, this was underneath the 6th Street Bridge. Oh my God, I got the craziest fucking ending to this story. This is so badass. It was like the last spot that I had was under the 6th Street Bridge. Built this out. By the way, 6th Street Bridge, they redid, right? In LA. And as a side note, the landlord there, also an MMA guy, wasn't a nice guy, to be honest. But he would rent out the space for movies. So I'm growing there, and all of a sudden I find out there's a film that was going to be using the exterior for some film, which was stressful as hell. Like I was constantly in a state of stress, but he would rent out the building for like 10 grand. And then one of the movies, they wanted to be inside the garage part of it. And I was like, no. And I had to tell like the location director, I'm like, I'm growing weed here. We can't do this. He's like, we'll fill it up with coffee. So they shot this Justin Timberlake movie and turned my grow garage into like a tobacco shop for the set. And meanwhile, I got all these actors in this space and I've got like a 60 lighter, like 5 feet away.
And everybody knows it.
Well,
on set?
Just heated, but they probably figured it out. And they shot for like a week. And I'm like,
tripping the whole time.
And so so the building would almost look like a piece of cheese, like a big piece of cheese, because it was basically one building cut into 2 properties. And then there was a firewall between my building and this other building that was behind it, more tucked away under the bridge. And I figured that my neighbors were up to something, but you don't ask questions. The Prop 215, you just minded your own fucking business. But I would see people come in at night and working. So I updated everything. I did a couple runs. I was like, the AC's not working right. I would switch the AC out. I did all the work myself. Did all the electrical work myself, bootstrapping the fuck out of this. This is going to be like the comeback grow after I have to shut down all these other things, get out all these other partnerships. And when you got like your spot rated or shut down, it doesn't always mean those partnerships ended back then.
Yeah.
Like you'd have to deal with people that like were not cool. They weren't going to take an L. You would take the L. You wouldn't, but they were not going to take the L. So they would hold that. You'd be like an indentured servitude, some of these people. And some of them you can tell them to fuck off. And a lot of them you couldn't, So you're always kind of in a heightened sense of stress. So I'm getting this spot going. The cool thing is it had like 600 amps. So I could really blow it out. And I turn on the power. And then like, I'd sleep during the day, work during the night. And then like 11 a.m., it might have been 10 or 11 a.m. It was like later morning, early afternoon. I just woke up like wide awake, like something tapped me on the shoulder. Completely present. Usually I'm not a morning person. I need my coffee, need to have a real ritual, read the news, whatever. No, I was just wide awake, completely alert. And then like 5 minutes later, I'm hearing bang, 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 bang. And that breaker I had turned on was popping back and forth heavy. So I run in there and I hit the mains, I turn everything off, wait for the thing to calm down. And I start hearing explosions outside. So I go outside and was it Anderson? I forget which street it was, but right across there was the transformer was arcing, shooting out like 15, 20 foot electricity. So I guess they were growing on the other side of me and they were stealing power, right? So there was that transformer could handle that entire drop for both buildings, but no one had ever turned on that 400 amp service except me because it was old. They didn't even know it was probably there. And so I turned that on and it overloaded the transformer. It was my guess.
Blew the transformer.
So I call the fire department. And mind you, I had just gotten and I'm still in this fucking group. I'm trying to get out of this group. I'm thinking this grow is going to be the way to get out of the situation where I'm relying on these guys. I got to clear this shit. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just, everything was fucked. It was the darkest moment, right? So, and this is what also led to the homelessness. Right. This is part of the problem. This is part of what triggered it all. So I call the fire department. Hey, the transformer's shooting electricity out. Is there a fire? No. And they're like, well, call the power department. Call DWP. I'm like, can you just hang out on the phone for a minute? Because I think there is going to be a fire. Because it was fucking explosions, shit blowing up. You might have seen, have you ever seen anything like that before?
Yeah, I've seen transformers,
Like been by it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like fucking Thor's hammer hit. Yeah. And so she's like, all right, I'll wait. The line to the drop lit on fire, like a fucking 12-inch fireball, right onto my next door neighbor. Within 30 seconds, their whole roof was ablaze.
Holy shit.
There's a fire. You need to get here. Right. Now, I had just put, how we would grow with the bucket system in DWC. Mm-hmm. I just put all my clones in the net pots with the hydroton. Maybe they had vegged a little bit. And I had a tent there like a big tent that I was vegging in. So while that building, I brought my dog over to some other warehouse photographer guy I knew, threw my dog in there because I lived there with a pit bull. And while that building was going up, and the fire department's on this way, I am taking every fucking plant out of that deep water culture system and throwing it in that tent because I knew they were going to be in the building. And I had my mom's in there, and I'll never forget the feeling because I'm feeling the heat come through the wall. And I'm like, I got to get as many plants.
So that whole building next to you started on
fire.
fire.
Whole building next to me burned to the ground. Right. Okay. So and it's going up because whatever happened, it triggered, it wasn't like a little bit of fire here. It was like the whole roof went.
Oh my
While I'm staring at this
God.
25-foot flame, right underneath the 6th Street Bridge. And I'm in the other building throwing all the plants in the tent because I knew the fire department's going to be in there. The fire department shows up and I open up the door for them and they come in. I just leave the door open and now my building wasn't connected to theirs, but it looked like it was a part of the same thing. So they're throwing all these, I threw everything in there, tighten it up as much as possible because if they came in there, I knew there was going to be police and they saw plants in there. Maybe, if they didn't see the plants, maybe they wouldn't look. I'm just fucking panicking, right? Yeah. Like, I just got to cover up as much of this as possible. And so they come in, they make sure all the main breakers are off and they start fighting the fire. And then I fucking leave the door open and I just book it over to down the street to this other warehouse where this guy, Jimbo, I knew that was there. And I'm just peeking out there watching them fight the fire. They get the fire out and 30, 45 minutes later, 60 DEA agents show up, right? Fucking windbreakers. I'm just like, oh, God, I'm going to go to jail today. And I guess the fire department called the people next door, called whoever owned that property or rented it out. And all of those growers showed up in their Escalade while the DEA was there and they arrested all of them. And I'm sitting here watching all this happen down the street. And my only thing I can think of is that they thought that they ran both spaces and they're taking burnt trays out and all the equipment. And I'm seeing all of it come out. There's a whole crew, vans. And then I'm watching those guys get arrested. And I'm like, shit. So I had to go back to the crazy shaman group's place and crash there for a week, go back into the other evil.
Yeah.
And then I came back there a week later. They had replaced the transformer and I started cleaning everything up and setting up a new run.
Oh my God.
Now what happened was...
They didn't take your equipment?
No.
That's amazing.
No, you don't understand. Because it was just a bucket system, right? There was a chiller, a bucket system, and then hanging HPS bulbs. They didn't really know what it was because it wasn't hoods. I was doing the Jack Me Offer test run.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It didn't look like, it just looked like some bullshit, Mickey Mouse setup, I guess. And so I got everything cleaned up, started working on it. I had to get, now my building, the firewall protected it. Nothing happened in my building. But then a month later, this construction crew showed up to start rebuilding that building next door. And that was the end of the show there. Because it was a bunch of weird, it was it wasn't a real construction crew. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was whoever was connected to that building. And they started fucking with that building and there was all kinds of problems.
So you got to shut it down. And that ate up all your capital.
Yeah. And I was cooked at that point.
Yeah.
So, it's been a crazy path. So that was when I was 29. And then, my family came pick me up. They didn't know what was going on with me. I was trying to explain to them. I was just just take me home and, do whatever, go to therapy, whatever you guys want, whatever. My aunt, she ran the mental health department for the New Orleans police. So they bring me to New Orleans and they want me to go. They're trying to put me into some weird experimental home, right? That was it was in the hood in New Orleans. And it was a bunch of brand new track houses in the middle of the hood. It was a weird, pink and pastel houses. And so I'm I'm not really, they all thought I was on meth or something. I'm like, no, you don't understand. That's not what's going on. I got out of a bad situation. I can't really talk about it, but I wasn't on any drugs. I was just really skinny because I wasn't eating. I was eating fucking food off of trees. and I was out of my mind, super, like when you get into that point where you're in survival all day, every day, you're not going to think right.
But do you think that it was the effects of really stemming from leftover, what those psychedelics did to you at that point, kind of flushing out, or you?
It was a combination of both, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like it was a combination, because it kind of destroyed a part of the way you see the world for a period of time.
Yeah. Exactly.
And who knows if they were plant-based, it could have been some synthetic combination of things. They were getting the substances made by some chemist who allegedly had some ties to the government. And there was another shaman group that was a part of all this, that they had learned the practices and rituals and all that from. And they were really tied into Burning Man, this group. So they worked heavy with like the guys that started up Burning Man. One of the guys in the group was the lawyer for Burning Man, like the main lawyer. So they, and they would hang out with famous actors. They would go after a lot of Scientologists. They would go after actors that were Scientologists and try and bring them into the group. So like I would be around, I'm not going to name any names, but like there were like really famous people that would go do journeys with them. So you thought, when you're
in that, you're like, oh, I'm in like
you're in the
right
elite
place.
Yeah. Like famous Grammy Award winning musicians, who I became friends with after, because they got out of the situation and we talked about it. I'm still friends with them. I won't name them. I'm not going to, I'm being open and honest about all this, but it's like, they were preying on people that were vulnerable, people that thought differently and had resources or some kind of talent that could be used to basically serve whatever their interests were. Right.
Yeah.
I was too crazy for them though.
Well,
I saw through it.
I get why you would get sucked into that, especially when you're seeing influential people be a part of it.
Right. No, they were a part of the Hollywood, like a Hollywood party scene too.
Yeah.
Right. And you see that, I see that now.
Yeah.
Right. I see that now. And I'm like, who's pulling the strings on this move? You know? I think they moved out of, I think after I kind of blew up the group for a minute, and caused a lot of problems for them on my way out the door. Because when I realized what it was, I've shifted my attention towards tearing it all apart.
Yeah.
And they moved off of psychedelics, and, because they preyed after a lot of people that I knew too. And some good friends of mine got caught up into that and never recovered. I was fortunate to recover, But yeah, the after effects of that, they moved to ketamine though. That's what I know that they mostly use for their.
Yeah, the Burning Man scene's pretty big in ketamine.
It all moved into like really potent ketamine. So that's what, I've never done ketamine. That's one of the things I've never tried. So not interested in it either. It's like if that's what they're using to like try and program people, and and these guys were dark dudes, and you didn't know that at first. Like they came in positive, speaking incredible truths, right? Seeming like they had a lot of power and mastery over the world, around a lot of influential people, would speak at events, I see the same kind of things with like a lot of the guys that run like MLM campaigns on social media, like the Ty Lopez weirdos, PBD. I mean, I like the PBD podcast, but it's like, they're all creating their own cult so they can enrich themselves. And it's a pattern. Right now is like the golden era for cults and con men. Like it's crazy.
Right now.
Yeah.
It seems like it.
Since COVID, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, I just went through it all earlier than most people did before it was a thing. Like there wasn't a lot of shaman groups and all of this. This is before, this is like before 2012. And so, I had this whole thing happen. Then, basically I didn't want to go into that home, and this is in New Orleans, back to New Orleans, where my parents trying to figure out what's going on with me. I'm like, just get me out of here. I'll come out of this and I'll tell you guys everything. I was terrified to tell them that like somehow I had fallen into a cult and all this, I was just ashamed. Right. and then was homeless and all this crazy ass shit. And they all looked at me like my whole family had socialized that I was a drug addict because I grew weed. So there was already like this understanding that like, and plus there had been a lot of my generation in my family that had become addicted to crack and meth and everything else. So they just thought I was another, you know, part of that. Right. But that wasn't what was going on. I was going through, you know, a potent mental health crisis at the moment, coming out of a ton of trauma, having somebody try to murder me the night before. They came and picked me up, and just trying to process all of it, and needed to just a break, check out. So
where you're at now, I mean, you have a family. How many kids do you have?
I have 2 kids.
You have 2 kids, and you just had a baby not too long ago.
Oh no, he's 5 now.
He's 5.
Yeah.
But I remember when you first had him.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was crazy. Yeah.
You think like now when you have a responsibility like that, because you're married,
yeah,
and you have a little 5-year-old boy and an older boy, right?
Yeah, he's 15.
Yeah. That foundation, what is that like for you, like now with that family structure and foundation? Do you think that gives you more ambition and drive and structure with how you're dealing with life today?
Absolutely. I think that once you have kids, you really become a man, because then your life isn't the number one most important thing. Their life is. And when my first son was born, I wasn't ready for that, right? And that's what triggered a lot of, you know, a lot of the stuff that came up for me during, you know, being a father before I was ready, not in the right situation, not in the right relationship, nothing was healthy. And that's what was the big lesson. And luckily I came at all this stuff before he was, you know, old enough to know. Like I got through all that bullshit early on. And then I was able to come back into his life as a healthy adult. And then from that place, I had to regain trust with everyone in my life, because they didn't even understand what had happened. And I couldn't really tell the story because it was so fucking crazy.
Yeah.
You know, it was almost easier for people to think that I was like, got addicted to some crazy street drug.
Yeah.
Because like what had really happened was fucking bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so.
I think, you know, for me, I think that was the big change is when I met my wife and we had a baby girl, and I was a little wild, you know. I went to Burning Man every year, and we'd build an art car and kind of lived, you know, a pretty different lifestyle than I do now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Cultivating cannabis all over the place, just, you know, doing whatever.
Yeah.
But when I met my wife and we had our baby girl, that completely changed everything.
Yeah.
Like
for the better.
Oh, for the better.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like, the foundation of home and having those kind of responsibilities. I'm not even the guys that used to hang out with me years ago don't like.
You're not in the same place.
No,
yeah.
They wouldn't even recognize me now.
Right.
Right. So, but sometimes it takes something like that, I guess, you know.
It doesn't have to take what I went through. I mean, no.
Yeah.
And I've always gone out of my way to experiencing things on the edge. I'm not like that anymore, but I've always lived extremely across the board. But it does, it shifts everything once you realize that, like, my life, like what I'm giving to the world is hopefully a better generation than my generation. And that's really like, now that's the goal. And how the biggest opportunity for me in being a father was not trying to escape the demons of my family or the past, trying to create a new family where all that bullshit stops with me. It doesn't carry on to my kids. And I look at like the hell I went through, which I authored for myself. Like I'm responsible for that experience that I created. I was not a victim. I went into that, but I look at that as like the way to close that chapter with my family, and that's not going to happen with my kids. They're going to have their own struggles. They're going to have their own journeys, but they're not going to be coming from that vibe that I had to come out of with my family, where there was just so much weird darkness. And right now I see that and that's the biggest joy, is to see that that you can rewrite, the story.
Yep.
You don't have to be the effect of someone else's cause.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can then shift your environment by setting a bigger cause for your life. And that was the thing, like I found out when my first son was born, I found out this lovely lady who I'm still friends with now, but we were on and off dating. We kind of partied together and all that. But I found out a month after I got dropped from Geffen that she was pregnant. And it was like, whoa, like so dealing, and that's been my whole life. Like a week before my 5-year-old was born, my mom passed away. So I went from seeing my mom for the last time, watching her get a very rare and aggressive cancer, and then flying right back out to hold my baby being born. And my whole life has been like, I didn't have any control of that.
Yeah.
But that's been my life.
Yeah.
My life has been a constant series of extremes. And now it's really like, let's not create that. Let's try and find a way where we can move out of the extremes. And I think in a way, all these experiences have prepared me to be hopefully a positive influence in the world right now. Because now when I look at the world, I was like, shit, I kind of went through that 10 years ago. And now I'm seeing the extremes play out overall. And I think a lot of people have felt that. And I think if we got through that in our own life, it's why I'm comfortable telling you the story about some of the stuff I've gone through and talking more about it, is that like, you can get through this. Like you might think you are at the end. You might be in hell and it might be just full of chaos, but that's just one moment. And all of the suffering I've gone through has just deepened my ability to be able to connect to other people and help other people.
Yeah. And understand and not judge.
Exactly.
Yeah. And acceptance.
And we should be honest about our struggles, because so much of the world is about projecting out this false idea of who we want people to buy from. It's a false idea that we're trying to sell so people we buy things, but people are flawed. The more honest I've been, the more comfortable I've been about talking about what I've gone through, the more that I get to hear other people's journeys and then understand them deeper. And we have a lot of people in the cannabis industry that have gone through some shit.
Yeah.
And if they're comfortable to share what they've learned and they feel welcomed to work through that, I think we can have some real progress that can come out of this space, because we're all like, I was just talking to the guy that I'm working with on it's growing my flower for the California market. And I have like a group of men, we all are real with each other and we'll all talk about how we're all reformed outlaws. Like he served.
Yeah, it's exactly where we are.
And it's like, but like, we didn't die. We made it through it. And now we're trying to do something positive with our life. So that gift of us surviving through this, we have to give back. We have to pay it forward by like, yo, this is not the way. Let me tell you, I already went down this road, barely survived. Here's a better way. Here's a way to look at this. Here's a way to come into this.
Yeah.
So that's the gift we can give our kids and their friends. And it's crazy, because like I got a 15-year-old in high school right now. Everyone in high school smoking weed already. And, I talked to him about everything that's going on in the space, what to stay away from, this and that. And then like,
yeah, you can guide him now.
Yeah, I can guide him. Like, this is why you don't want to do that. And it's not about like, I don't want you to think just because I'm telling you something's dangerous that it's exciting. Like, no, there's real term consequences with this. I'm not going to demonize the cannabis flower. Like, you know, and he'll be honest with me about his experiences though, because I didn't put all that religiosity behind it, like that I grew up with, where I had to not tell my parents about what I was involved in.
Yeah, he has a mentor to go to.
Yeah, totally. And so it was, you know, he told me the other day that like everyone that he's hanging out, I'm not going to blow anybody up, but he was like, we're all done with this and this. I'm like, why? What happened? And he's like, well, we read that LA Times article you told me about all the pesticides in the vapes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, there we go.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm like, and then we talk about, well, how do you think those products got to you? Who's selling? Those are people that are selling pesticide-filled vapes to kids. Those are people that are evil, you know?
Yeah.
Like you don't want to give them any money. You don't want them to be part of anything. And you know, and so I'm even thinking about like, is there a way that we can talk about this with the kids in high school, educate them? Like as you go through your process of exploring life and all of these things, this is, there's like a natural way that we all went to it and we had to lie about it. And then there's things you want to stay away from.
Yeah.
You know?
I just got a text message from my wife. Her cousin's kids are buying cannabis in Georgia from a smoke shop.
Yeah.
And the mom she's freaking out because she hears all these horror stories of, you know, fentanyl laced cannabis or this or that.
Which is true.
Yeah. But, you know, I just told her, I was like, look, it's THCA, you know, and they're going and buying it from a smoke shop. Is it clean?
No idea. No.
You have no idea.
There's no
Most likely not.
Yep.
Because we know how stringent cannabis testing is. So is it clean? Probably not. Right? And so she's like, well, what do I do? You know, because the kid doesn't have access to cannabis, but you don't want him smoking, you know, dirty, you know.
Well, the only thing you can do is really educate them on, you know, because I've busted out, like my son can say pesticides by name now. And we've talked about what they do to the human body, because they're going in like, look, you're going in, maybe you want to smoke weed in your high school, whatever. You're not supposed to do that. That's not legal. First and foremost, it's the first thing I say, but like, you can't tell that to kids. They're going to do whatever they want. But one of the things you need to understand is that all these pesticides were designed initially to kill people, and then they were reformulated to kill insects. So let's look at what each one of these things do to the insects and what each one of these things will do to you. And then you need to ask yourself a question whether or not you want to have those kinds of problems. Because you're coming in there to get high. You're not getting high off of this. You're screwing up your endocrine system. You're screwing up how your body's going to regulate hormones. You're screwing yourself up in ways we don't even know, because these are the warning labels around ingesting or breathing this in. We're talking about combusting it, turning into a totally different chemical formulation.
Like, combusting,
and
heating.
we don't even know, right? So it's like, you know, it's not worth it. Like, okay, maybe you want to experiment, but you don't know what you're experimenting with, right? So you can do all the research in the world, but and we're having that trouble on the legal space right now, on the regulated space, right? We're having trouble figuring out whether or not, I mean, I think definitely dispensaries in these medical markets are better, but there's always a moment where we have problems where these things get through and nobody has any idea what happens when you start vaporizing these chemicals.
What? You know, you're obviously...
I'd rather him start growing his own.
Yeah. There you go. Send him a light and tell him how to grow hydroponics and some
grow
Athena.
tomatoes.
Yeah. You're one of the most intelligent guys that I speak to in the space when it comes to just overall general cultivation knowledge, but also laws. And because I just talking to you, you retain information really well and you digest it and can understand it. For the guys that don't really understand what the THC laws are and what the hemp bill is, can you do a breakdown on like THC in general and the hemp bill and the legalities surrounding that?
So, so the intention behind the Farm Bill was for people to grow hemp products that had no psychoactive elements into them, right? So the idea was for fiber, grain, seed, and then the cannabinoids that were non-psychoactive that could be used as a nutraceutical, like CBD, maybe CBN, right? We know that those aren't psychoactive. But the way that they wrote the Farm Bill was around how a plant is considered hemp or cannabis. And that was directly focused around one molecule, the THCA molecule. So there was a guy up in Canada, I forget his name, but they wrote the regulations on how to define cannabis and hemp off of 0.3 delta 9 THC, which is the heated up or decarbed THCA molecule. So the plant will create delta 9 on its own, usually in low trace amounts, but it's usually going to be represented as THCA, which then when it gets consumed or aged, that THCA converts to delta 9. Now also with the hemp bill, you have to test whether or not something's cannabis or hemp, whether it qualifies for cannabis or hemp in the field through a pre-harvest test that you schedule as the farm. So when I was growing hemp, I'd have to call the regulator out, and then I would tell him I'm going to be harvesting in 30 days, and he would come and test the flower. He would take like an apical bud set from different plants, and then they would test that to see whether or not it was below the 0.3 delta 9. And if it was a little bit higher, then you had to destroy the crop. Sometimes they give you up to 1% in some states, but it's basically the whole process, and the whole intention was to make sure that you weren't growing psychoactive cannabis instead of hemp. And if that accidentally happened and you got the wrong seed stock, you'd have to go through the process of trying to appeal and trying to get that through. But, something that's 1% is really not going to get you high anyway. That was an arbitrary number that was set up by one guy, and then it was applied in Canada, and then they just took that application in Canada and put it into the Farm Bill. So it was a starting point. All right, so that's fundamentally how the government views the same species of plant, just they've fragmented into two forms, one that's going to be psychoactive, one that's going to be non-psychoactive. But they define that around delta 9. That's the problem, right? So the intention of the law is not being honored anymore. The intention was you can grow hemp, but you're not going to grow anything psychoactive. And then people got creative and looked at how they defined what was cannabis was just based off of the delta 9. And they started to play around with chemistry and how you can take hemp flower and use the precursor, which is like CBG or CBD, and then convert that into psychoactive chemistry. So people were taking non-psychoactive cannabinoids and then converting them into all the other things that ended up getting into smoke shops and everything else, subverting the intention of the law, which was if you're a hemp farmer, you're not doing anything psychoactive. It's going to be like nutraceuticals, health, hemp fiber, grain, all of that. And they used the language of the Farm Bill to get around that. But the intention of the Farm Bill was for non-psychoactive products to come out of hemp, right?
Yeah.
Now people are arguing the way that the testing regulations was written, that THCA is not delta 9, therefore it should be, they want THCA to be treated the same way as CBD. But we know that THCA, when you smoke it, it turns into delta 9 and becomes psychoactive, right? So it's gotten real granular and technical, so people can essentially use a hemp license to sell the same exact products that are in a regulated dispensary or medical state program, right? Which, good for you. You guys are syntax savvy, but at the same time, it's, how much did you spend $250,000 a month to keep your business going in Nevada?
And 18% tax.
18% tax.
All this regulation.
And I remember
failed testing. And
I remember when you started and when you started that biggest project, the road that you had, how much time and money you had to put into that, and that you sold companies and put money back into that. And and the whole goal is that I want to just grow legal weed, do it the right way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing that we were sold, right? Getting into this space is essentially we're going to become a partner with the state. And then the deal is we'll make sure we're following by the rules and creating really quality product, and we sell into the program, and the government gets to take all the money they want from the taxes. And then overnight, you have hemp farmers that have very little oversight, no testing, just creating an entire market that's diluting this market that so many people have invested so much time and headaches and brain damage in getting. So, and at the same time, because we're all from the cannabis industry, part of me looks at the hemp guys that are doing the THCA flower thing. I'm like, well, that's smart. And the other part of me is like, fuck you, because it's like, we just wasted all this time if it's that easy. But it's not real. It's a scam, because what they are, if we look at the intention, the intention doesn't match up with what the idea of the Farm Bill is. Now, the complexity with that is you got all these Republicans, right, who have come in and built and been a part of or are active, like North Carolina. Like a lot of the politicians there are owners of hemp companies that are selling cannabis as nationwide hemp-derived flower, right? Whatever it is. And meanwhile, at the same time, demonizing the legal weed programs, because those are Democrat-developed programs. But they're selling the same thing. I like listening to Ron DeSantis talk about the dangers of doing a recreational program in Florida, and then at the same time promoting the hemp program there. And it's like clear doublespeak. And someone tells me that they don't know what it is. I don't believe them anymore. I think that all the politicians understand that what they're doing is getting early into a market, basically fragmenting the legal and licensed market, which is unhealthy, which needs a lot of work, which needs a lot of help. But isn't it? This is the part of it where people can hate on you online. Oh, this is the way. This is the freedom path for cannabis, And we've all been bitching about all these legal programs, but we've also know that we were honoring the intention, and this is the stair step towards legalization. Okay, you guys are going to let us. We're going to do it. We'll play by the rules, and then we're going to use our investment and your investment in us to be able to shift the laws and deschedule and reschedule and make this progress go through. And it's a slow untangling of prohibition. That I think is actually a smarter way of going about this. Like just legalizing everything overnight is going to lead to more war on drugs, because it's going to be a disaster, and it's going to cause all these problems that we see in New York and everywhere else, where people are smoking shit that they don't even know what they are. It's going to have long-term health consequences. And ultimately, my 15-year-old kid and all his friends are going to be getting all that bullshit and killing themselves. So I don't want that either. But so the hemp industry is just kind of doing that in a lot of respects. And if you go to these hemp flower markets, they have fake COAs on things. Like, you don't know what it is. Most of it's just backdoor packs. Who knows if it's got pesticides, all of these kinds of things. There's zero regulation. And
there's zero regulation on pesticide when it comes to THCA flower.
They're not tested.
They're not tested for it.
Now, nothing is, unless it's fit for a 25B low risk, you can't use it on hemp. But no one's really monitoring that. So like the label's the law.
So know it's happening.
Yeah, it's happening.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of this product is just backdoored. And there's a whole way that all this happens.
Did it start with the labs understanding how on the hemp side to kind of spearhead the movement of, not testing for Delta-9, but testing for THCA?
I think it started with, I think it started with there being markets developed, especially starting up with like HAC and Delta-8. And I think it started with the hemp chemistry labs.
Yeah.
It started with there being a surplus of CBD biomass.
They didn't know what to do with.
They didn't know what to do with. And then they got creative. And then most of those markets were developed outside of the country first, like Japan. Like people were exporting in hemp products into other markets that were psychoactive. And then shortly after that, those markets started to develop in the US. And it was really first like the Delta-8, but early on, because I was, I managed like 1,000 acres of hemp and had a small hemp farm and was doing seed production and all of that. And I saw that happening early on, but it was going internationally because the hemp industry collapsed in the US. And then people were trying to find other markets outside of the US, and they hadn't really developed the smoke shop market yet. And then that started to happen when big brands, like cookies and all of that started doing Delta 8 and started to promote that. And then you started to see more ubiquitous movements towards bringing those products onto the hemp shelves and the hemp or the hemp store shelves or smoke shop shelves. But it was also alongside to with Kratom, Kratom.
Yeah, Kratom. Yeah.
So there's all these like really like ambiguously regulated products that started to kind of enter in the market. I saw Delta 8 and THCO, first, and then it's just kind of led into other types of things, which then led in the THCA market, where now you can just go into these shops and buy flower.
What about local law enforcement? I know on a federal level, the hemp bill's the hemp bill, and that's legal, right? Yeah. But on a local law enforcement, if you're driving around with 100 pounds of THCA flower,
it's Russian roulette. So if you're driving around with that, most of the time you're going to get arrested and get in trouble, especially in the states where like it's really blowing up. There's more prohibition. Like,
yeah, but you have you're rolling around with a hemp license,
yeah,
and lab testing that says, hey, this is THCA flower. I mean,
well, it depends on how much work the cop wants to do, but I'm hearing that it's getting harder now. Where the law enforcement, they'll take it and they're going to get it tested. And I'm hearing that happen on the consumer level too. So I know people that have like DEA transport permits for hemp product. I think if you have something like that, you're going to be left alone. But what I am hearing about, because I'm going to a lot of different states and hearing, like in Indiana, they don't really care if they pull you over and you have THCA flower. They're going to arrest you for it or fine you for it, whatever they're doing there, and they're going to get it tested. And there's like more strict protocols happening, and it's affecting the consumers more so than the producers. So it's like this gray area where you can get away with distributing it and selling it, but as a consumer, you're not protected, right? And that's kind of the scam, because it's being sold as one thing, but it's really not, right? So if it's being sold as hemp, but then it's being treated as real weed in states where it's still illegal, then you're getting scammed. And then like the cost of that is not just like an upset stomach or, food poisoning.
Long-term side effects.
Long-term side effects, having a record, having to go through all that, maybe having your life take a sideways turn. And you're like, I thought it was hemp flower. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any lawsuits that come out of that.
Have you heard of any lawsuits? I heard there was a lawsuit of a girl that was in Florida or something. She smoked some CBD flower and, tested hot for THC.
Yeah.
And ended up filing some lawsuits.
I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot of that because a lot of people are making a lot of money with it. And people get pissed when I talk about this. But at the same time, it's like, it's a shortcut.
Why do they get pissed?
Because they're making money off of it. And, and like sometimes I've spoken in the room loud enough where things happen, and they just like ignore this. This is how we're surviving. Like, I also understand too, it's like, it's really hard to make it in this industry, and it's like, this might be a way for someone to come out of a hole and they've had a raw deal or whatever. But at the same time, it's about the cause and effect. Like, what seed are you planting? What's going to come out of this? Now, the other thing is like, if Trump wins the election and we've got more push on the Republican side politically, we could see it continue on for a long time because the Republican judges that are being put into place, Supreme Court all the way down, are literalists, so they could just read the Farm Bill as it is. They might throw out the Miller Amendment because the Miller Amendment is basically going to kill any products that are post-harvest manufacturing. So you can't, like, all the CBD market, everything, like, it's a heavy-handed amendment.
What's the Miller Amendment?
The Miller Amendment is an amendment to the Farm Bill. I think it's going to go up for review. It's already been put on the bill for review. It's got to go through the process. I think it's like somewhere around September. But it basically, it's an anti-psychoactive hemp bill. And the way that they're doing that is basically saying it's not allowed to manufacture any products chemically from the plant post-harvest. Like, it's just
flower extracts.
No, just be
anything.
Like, the only thing you can do.
What can you do with it?
Like, I'm assuming it would be
textiles.
Like industrial type products.
I mean, I thought that.
But that's the problem, because that would kill all of the hemp industry. I think there's some problems with the seeds as well. I think it restricts it would kill everyone that's trying to do the hemp thing the right way too. Because I don't even know how many decorticators are in the United States, but it's like there's not a lot of industrial manufacturing of hemp going on right now. Most of that's like kicked over to Indonesia. And it's just a really heavy-handed bill that would kill everybody I know that's doing a lot of work in the space. And I think there is a valuable nutraceutical market that can come out of hemp where we have beneficial cannabinoids that aren't psychoactive that people can take. I think that's been a real positive thing to come out of all this. So the Miller Amendment's super heavy-handed. So it's basically everything is extreme. It's going one way.
Yeah, a little too extreme.
It's too extreme. So that would be a problem for everybody. And then, all the guys that are trying to do hemp the right way could get angry at all the THCA flower producers because they kind of they're ruining it.
Yeah.
They're ruining it. And it's like, you got these YouTube guys on here that have, I won't name their names, but they all have THCA flower brands. It's a lot. There's a lot of this stuff going on. And they're getting a huge unfair advantage by playing this, by developing a market quicker. That's undermining all, we know how hard it is to build a brand in this space, how to build a facility, to do all the work that we've had to do. And then to have like a streamer come in, start making like your nut 250 grand off of a THCA flower thing, and then pretend like it's not psychoactive, but at the same time, like sell it as a psychoactive product.
Yeah. It's,
you want to kind of fucking go kick rocks,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Like I feel like you're in the wrong business.
Right.
Right. Like you didn't go the right path. Maybe you should have went a different path.
Well, I would just say that anybody that feels that way, I think it's going to correct itself. And if it doesn't, then we're fucked anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like if things just stop making sense.
So Democrats get in, where do you think it goes? Republicans get in, where do you think it goes?
I think Republicans coming in, I don't think rescheduling or descheduling is going to be on any agenda. I think that we'll have legal weed through the farm bill, and that we'll just have more of this THCA stuff is what I think will happen. And then there might be like states that have issues with it and states that don't. But I think there's enough Republican investment in the hemp industry where it's just going to be like, they're going to double speak the shit out of that.
Exactly what's happening in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. And, I threw like a little shit fit about the Chevron doctrine, getting thrown out, and everyone's like, doesn't really understand what that means.
Break that down.
That just, and I want to be clear to say that like, we have a lot of problems with the regulation agencies, but what that allowed was the regulation agencies like the EPA, the FDA, to make deciding factors on laws without having to go through the courts. So it's basically like, it was the court saying, you guys are the experts. We're going to let you decide how we do this. And they also decide like the consequences if you go against the regulations, right? So now they don't have that power anymore. And it's gone because it's unconstitutional to be able to allow a regulatory agency to act the same way that the courts are acting. That's the argument that's being made. Valid argument. The problem is that judges don't understand. You think judges understand complex cannabinoid scientists are going to be able to rule on what's going on with the cannabis and hemp industry in a way? No. Have the regulators been doing a good job with it either? No. But we should have experts that are the ones creating the advice. Like there should be more of us writing the fucking regulations for this industry, not these nitwits that don't know anything about any of it. And then you want to put it all in the hands of the one judge that can legally take gifts from corporations now? What do you think is going to happen with that?
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so it's like,
it's insanity.
Everyone that's like all stoked on this, I hope you're worth billions of fucking dollars and can buy politicians like some of the other fucking people that we know that have tried to fuck shit up in this space. Because now there's one more huge thing for them to get a lot of problems out of the way. So if we look at that, right, maybe it's the judge that decides whether THCA is hemp or cannabis, and it has nothing to do with science. It has to do with how
somebody's experience and opinion on a certain situation
and how they interpret the farm bill. Well, when we look at it, okay, so it's like it has to be tested this way or by other, acceptable measures, right? There's language in the farm bill that's just like acceptable. What's acceptable? Who decides that? Now it's going to be a judge. Where's this going to go?
Yeah.
So it could go, a lot of people are gung-ho and getting Trump back in because there's a belief that the economy is going to come back in and we'll have a better life because of it all. the other thing that's going to happen is he when he was president, he took out a ton of regulations that protected us from pesticides. Like, that's the thing people don't understand. Like,
for farming in general.
He brought back chemistry, you know, that we shouldn't be using on our food. And he made it all permissible. And so there's a cost to all that. And so what would happen? Is the hemp industry testing for pesticides on their flower? No, there's no sensible regulations. How long is it going to take for sensible regulations to happen then? They can't even figure out what fucking hemp is. You think they're going to be able to write regulations on this anytime soon? No, it's just going to be a giant money grab. And whichever industry throws the most money at the governing politicians, that's who's going to win. Now, if the Democrats win, this is my thought. I think that we'll have another narrative path. It's going to be all about sentiment, virtue signaling, and, identity politics, more of that. So it's going to be all catched into this whole thing about social equity programs. It's going to go slow. It's going to be really broken. It's not going to work out. There's going to be like the corporations are just going to come in and do deals with the social equity people. And we're going to have this whole path. And then they're going to create a program where they're going to let people that were more impacted by the whole thing get a leg up, but there'll be a corporation that's just paying them their $70,000 a year to use their like the same bullshit.
Yeah.
It's just,
we're kind of screwed either way.
I think that overall people are going to hate me for saying this, but I think that sloppy path, even with all the social equity stuff and all that stuff that's not real, that's been shown a lie, I think trying to get that healthy is probably the better path. Trying to have a licensed market where we take it upon ourselves, like we the people, bro. Like, who gives a fuck what they think or what they say? This is just the rules that they set. Then we have to come in and try and correct those rules intelligently, logically, and thoughtfully. So as long as we get more engaged in working with the regulators and talking with the politicians, we might not get what we want, but we could steer it closer and closer to something that makes more sense. Whereas with the Farm Bill thing, it's just going to be whoever's got all the gold going to make all the rules.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be just, which some people they're cool with that. But that doesn't create a structure, and that doesn't create a product that's going to be safe. That's going to create something that's going to lend itself to class action lawsuits 20 years from now, when someone's got a new kind of cancer that came out of all the fucking terp spray that's being put on all these fucking LCG packs that are backdoored as hemp.
Yeah, 100%.
So what do we want to create? It's up to us.
Yeah.
All these people are just fucking front men. All these politicians are just front men. But we can get in there and we've seen, Elliot's like a bull in a china shop from Catalyst, but he's doing things that are causing change to happen. And, he's doing it like a madman, but we don't have to do it that way. We can help create a path towards change, towards fixing things. Elliot's just doing it the best he can in this weird, everything's become a goddamn reality show.
Yeah.
It's the only way you get attention is by turning into a reality show.
Yeah.
But we don't have to do it that way.
Moving on to Schedule 3, where do you see it going? It's up in the air right now. Everyone says September. What do you think for Schedule 3?
Oh, I think it's going to take a long time. Yeah.
You don't think this year?
No. It's not first of all, it's like probably
low priority.
It's probably not even in the top 50 of priorities.
Yeah.
And it's just a fun thing that politicians say. It's all about sentiment, right? Our world is dominated by sentiment, and you feed sentiment to make people feel a certain way so they get the support. That doesn't mean that's actual action. But at some point it'll happen.
Even if it did happen, do you really see that as
it's not going to mean anything
positive? Other than we can get bank accounts.
The positive thing is going to be the funding for pharmaceutical research. And this is the thing, I'm having a change of heart on all this. We're all of us at some point, we like to bag on pharmaceutical companies because it's pretty corrupt here. and they shouldn't be allowed to advertise and buy our news stations, right? Yeah, that's fucking crazy. But it's not all good and it's not all bad. And what the pharmaceutical research around cannabis is going to do is it's going to develop plant-based alternatives for medicines that will be superior. We should be funding that. We should be looking at that. That was part of the reason why we did the legalization thing anyway, is to be able to R&D this plant, understand how it can help improve our quality of life, treat and cure diseases in a really fucking awesome way. You know, that's a good thing. And I don't think the pharmaceutical industries have any interest in participating in the commercial recreational market with cannabis. They're going to create totally different products. You know, like there's not going to be like a Pfizer lemon cherry gelato brought to you by Pfizer. No, it's going to be some funky ass name. No one's going to know it came from cannabis, but it's going to like maybe be a part of like curing. I mean, they're already on the end of curing cancer, you know, and all of this. And it's funny. I had this whole thought that like the whole mRNA shot that everyone had to get, or most people had to get, was just a giant beta test to see how people were going to function with the new mRNA technology that's going to radically change all of our lives for the better. So it was bad what they did and how they did it, but all these extension life, the mRNA vaccine was created, like that whole technology was created as a cancer treatment drug, and it wasn't working. And then they pivoted it quickly into coronaviruses. And then it was thrown out in an ineffective way, and they lied to everybody about all of it. But at the same time, that technology has value that's now being developed for all the cancer research. And they were able to do billions of fucking trials on all of us. But it could have a positive ending if you look into what's going on. And that's interesting. We just don't know how.
What do you think the positives with the mRNA vaccine?
I just think it's a new delivery system. It's a new way. All of the cancer drugs, I think they're curing cancer right now. We might not have that problem anymore. The mRNA thing could also be a part of like regenerating our cellular structure, having us live forever or whatever, live longer. It's funny. We're like approaching nuclear war at the same time that technology is developing things that will regenerate our bodies so we can live longer and not have the same kind of health problems, right? So it's like we're reaching this point where it's like, are we going to blow ourselves up or are we going to live forever? Yeah. Which one's going to win?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%.
But the mRNA is a part of all of that. And, you know, I've gotten to be friends with some people in St. Louis that are in the cannabis industry that also know people in biotech that are doing that work. And they're like, dude, this shit is for real. Like it really does work. You know, you can look at like, Ozempic thing has become a whole craze for people losing weight, but it's curing symptoms for people that have Crohn's, IBS, other digestive issues. I mean, there's all these things that come into fashion and then are judged because of how they come into fashion, but actually have a lot more benefit than we fully understand. So I think that if Schedule 3 were to happen with that, I don't think anything's going to change with the commercial market at all. I think it's just going to allow for money to go in and developing more medical technologies and more medicine from plant-based, from this plant, which is good. And the real thing that people need to be thinking about is big tobacco, who's been losing market share to cannabis, and big beverage, who's been losing market share to cannabis. Nobody that's watching this podcast or we hang out with or talk with is going to be competing with any products with pharmaceutical companies. We're going to be competing with products with Philip Morris and Southern Wine and Spirits, all those alcohol companies, or we're going to be working for them or with them at some point, and we'll have to carve out a lane for that. And that could be good or bad. But that's really what's, you know, and those companies have, like Big Tobacco has a lot of broad utility patents on devices to combust cannabis and all these other kinds of things. They're like, they're just waiting. And really just the chaos of this market has insulated us from them stepping in and having more of a play because they've tried.
So you see Schedule 3 as a net positive if once it goes through?
I do. Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't think I think the overall population will get a net positive out of it. I don't know if we'll get like us.
Cultivation.
I don't know if, I don't know. Yeah. We're just going to look at it like, okay, whatever. But I think overall things will come out of it that we don't care about anymore. that was like, we would wave that flag when we were trying to get legalization, but now that we've just been getting hammered.
We got a taste with 64.
Yeah, that's the thing. You got hammered and everyone lied to us and it was all a bunch of bullshit. And, and now we're just, everyone's mostly cynical, but while we're kind of like bathing in our own cynicism, something cool might come out of it that might fucking really help our kids.
Yeah.
And that's, we just won't see it because we're in our own bubble.
Yeah.
Sure. Or if it comes out, we'll be like, we don't trust that. Remember the fucking shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just how we are,
Yeah.
So.
Dude, I really appreciate you making the trip out.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a great conversation.
Yeah, I had a good time.
Really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks,
Appreciate you, bro.
Appreciate it. See ya.
Cool.